the US or what's going on in the Red Sea, once again, we're paying a very high price of our dependence on the rest of the world. We need to act to reindustrialize Europe, not just for the European citizens and for their purchasing power, but also for the environment and for sovereignty. The same mistakes are provoking the same errors, so time on time. Let's stop this.
On behalf of the left group, Mrs. Villanueva Ruiz. Thank you very much, President. More than a month after the plastic pellets spill that has overwhelmed Galicia and other coasts, the regional government of the PP is denying this, the same that denied climate change and that said that even when the Prestige oil spill took place, it wasn't that serious. Not only did they say that the pellets aren't toxic, but that you can even eat them. That is the level of responsibility and lack of shame. So we need European legislation, ambitious legislation that will put an end to business impunity that are not assuming responsibility and liability, and this is stopping the authorities from acting immediately. Of course, we have to protect the environment and our fisheries sector. The spill on the 8th of December was a disaster, but what has happened since then is pure negligence. Never again. Thank you very much. We've come to the end of the list of speakers speaking on behalf of the political groups. Now, Mrs. Dancy.
President, Commissioner, colleagues, plastic pellets are one of the major sources of microplastic pollution. In the air, water and soil, they can spread through our bodies and animals' bodies. The Commission's ambitious aim of reducing plastic release by 70% is a breath of life for our marine and land ecosystems that are suffering from pollution. We need better practices, mandatory certification, harmonised methodology for prevention and inspection of microplastic pollution. Those are the kind of smart solutions which we need so that stakeholders in the sector can see that there are very clear rules and instruments that can be used purely in the interest of health. We only have one chance for health, and this kind of toxicity can easily lead to death. So we need to strive for the Europe we want to see.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Montserrat. Thank you very much, President. To you from the left, are you really so nervous that you're going to lose at the polls again? On the Spanish coast, it's not just the Galician coast, we're getting pellets from a container. They're washing up on the shores. We could be talking about the 350 people that are working on 55 beaches and helicopters and what the Galician regional government is doing. But you're not interested because what the left wants to do is to gain something from this crisis, something they couldn't get in other ways. Now, I would like to say that you gave in to Puigdemont, fugitive from justice, but yet you're slow to deal with this crisis that affects everyone. Galicia is acting. You act as well because you have powers here. To ask you to show responsibilities too much, but at least stop being opportunistic and stop lying. Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Albuquerque.
toneladas.
26 tons of microplastic pellets across the coast of Galicia and Asturias. Tragic images of millions of pellets polluting our environment. I would like to express my support and gratitude to our Galician brothers and sisters who are spending day after day clearing up their beaches. I presented a report on prevention of microplastic pollution. The aim was to take the Commission proposal forward in relation to three key aspects. When pellets are lost in the environment, they're extremely difficult to recover. For that reason, all of our efforts should go into effective prevention measures to reduce or even eliminate losses of such pellets into the environment. This disaster has also made it clear that we need to extend legislation to cover maritime transport too. As the Commissioner was saying, we need to bring more pressure to bear in the International Maritime Organization to ensure that we have effective measures governing European territory. Deterrent measures. There are different operators along the value chain that need to be effectively involved in strengthening sanction measures. But I also want to be clear that no European citizen, no Galician citizen should see accountability for those responsible for protecting our ecosystems. Finally, a plea. Let us not say, OK, this happened on one beach, that's happened. Let then people take electoral advantage of this in political debates. We need to look at the solution for the people of Galicia. We don't want another traumatic event like the one of 21 years ago. Let us take the right path of history now.
Thank you very much. Mr. Torvalds.
Mr. Speaker, dearest Commissioner, I have with me 3 different reports here, and they are all telling the same sad story. Containers lost at sea is a huge problem. The catastrophe outside or off the coast of Portugal and Spain actually there was 6 containers. What we see in the reports, it goes for the US vessel El Faro, it goes for the Ever Smart, is that the containers are usually stuck in a criminal way. In the future, with more storms, you're going to have more problems, more catastrophes, if we don't get the vessels in order. The equipment is bad, the vessels are old, and they are stuck in a way which is not going according to the rules. So what you have on the top of a stack is a too heavy container, and when the ship starts rolling 20% to the left and to starboard and port, then you have it there. So we have to get the rules to work, and if we don't get them, the catastrophes will be there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Miranda.
Como eurodiputada galega, pedí este debate ante la catástrofe medioambiental del
Following the environmental disaster affecting my country of Galicia, I launch a call for ACTA. It's not only a problem for Galicia, it's for the whole of Europe. We saw through December that the pellets were spreading, but it was a month later in January that the official communication took place. So the government of Galicia and the people of Galicia felt completely abandoned and left to their own devices. Maria Lago, I would like to thank, who's here, and the mayor of Ribeira, and all of those who've engaged in the clear-up activity. Thank you to those members from 5 groups for signing the letter, which we will send to you. Commissioner, Galicia is not alone, and the anti-pollution level 2 alert only came in late too. If you listen to people from the PP, you hear these slogans coming from Galicia about improvisation, negligence, lack of transparency. The PP government is calling them little plastic balls, but we're talking about thousands of bags of pellets that are spreading. Such levels of incompetence. Look at the unique biodiversity and marine ecosystem of Galicia, the huge impact on the marine environment. This has a knock-on effect on fishers and on people's way of life. The PP government has been harming this way of life for many years now, and it goes beyond that to the whole fisheries sector. So no distraction tactics, please. There'll be a demonstration in Santiago on Sunday with 5 different collectives, but the mismanagement is nothing new. We went there with the Prestige too. Nothing has been learnt since then. And a marketing company linked to the PP has been involved in the clear-up of pellets with a coat from the protective jacket from the junta, saying, oh, well, wear this, that'll be better. It's all about PR. We're talking about dangerous materials with significant accidents, with consequences for the environment, and the new microplastics loss regulation needs to cover this. Galicia deserves better. It deserves a responsible government.
You have a blue card from Mr. Guzmão. Do you accept it? Yes. Yeah. 30 seconds for you.
Senhora Deputada Ana Miranda.
Ms. Miranda, solidarity with Galicia, solidarity with the people of Galicia in the light of these events. Picking up on what you said, given that the municipal chamber president is here, what support was there from the government of Galicia? The Portuguese media were saying that there had been prefect level and NGO level, fishers level activity without much support from the regional government. Is that true? Thank you for that question. The PP government in Galicia, as you said, took at least a month to get state assistance. We are still waiting in Galicia. There are 169 workers hired by the government of Galicia, over 1,500 kilometres. Don't interrupt me. They are rejecting the offers from the government of the state. So I'd like to thank those representatives and the 100 or more people. I don't have this in Spanish. I don't have this in writing. You had a response in writing.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Miranda, thank you very much. You have more than enough time to answer. Mr. Terch, you have the floor.
Buenos días a todos.
Good morning, everyone. Just to make it all clear, on the 18th of February, there are elections in Galicia. It's a beautiful region of Spain with beautiful coastline, but we've got plastic pellets washing up. But Tarragona and Catalonia have also grappled with the same problem, but yet we didn't have such a debate. Don't worry. The title misses the point. There isn't an ecological disaster. It's the wrong title of the debate. There is a problem to solve, but it's just one more problem to solve. But the problem is that the Spanish government has basically carried out a coup d'etat. So they like anything that allows them to talk about other issues, anything but the amnesty. And they were told that there is a coup and that they are destroying the Spanish judiciary. So they'd rather look for little plastic balls or pellets because it's easier to do that, pellets that are apparently a disaster. So, and then there's the Galician government, too. I think they should all look at protecting the Galician coast more and fighting against Agenda 2030, which is responsible for what is happening there. The next speaker is Mrs. Marisa Matias.
Thank you, President. Colleagues, we don't often see such a clear demonstration of complete indifference to people and people's suffering, as we've just heard. I'd like to start by thanking Ms. Miranda for putting her finger on the nub of this crucial issue. It's an environmental disaster once again for the people of Galicia. 26 tons of plastic pellets ending up in the sea. Just like with the Prestige 20 years ago, it was incompetence from the PP Galician authorities. Totally unacceptable. Our marine ecosystems being polluted by plastic pellets is something which cannot be faced with impunity in Galicia or anywhere else in the world. We see a growing problem, and in spring we'll be talking not only about Galicia but Portugal and France, their coastlines too. So we need ambitious proposals to avoid microplastic pollution, to prevent it, so that this phenomenon can cease to exist. So we see environmental disaster denialism here played out in real time by some Spanish representatives.
Thank you very much. Mr. Sinčić.
Hvala vam. Thank you very much. Plastic pellets and their influence on the environment is significant, and any ecological disaster is a loss for life on Earth. But most of the waste in the sea comes from land, not the sea. So waste management is crucial in every country in the EU with recycling and waste management. Maybe it is better for some countries to join their efforts together for waste management efforts. Let us not deceive ourselves. There is very little level of waste management in Europe. Most waste is not now exported to China, but to Taiwan and other countries. In the city of Zagreb, we had a disaster at the waste management site, also in Osijek and in Varaždin. So all the centers for waste management are a disaster for the cities and the local governments. And the local government in Zagreb is not able to handle this situation. And also we have seen who is in charge of the Environment Protection Fund, and this is a criminal activity. Croats need to find political courage to stop this and stop the environment.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Pereira is next.
Acidente que não podia ter.
An accident that should never happen happened. Over 1,000 bags of microplastic pellets now along the coast of the north of Spain, Galicia, since the beginning of the year. The government of Portugal, the regional government of Galicia, the national government of Spain could not have avoided this because of the nature of the accident. But when people have powers, when people have responsibilities, it is incumbent upon them to respond properly. We saw prompt and timely communication from the government of Portugal, but Pedro Sanchez was playing politics with this, and we saw the hypocrisy of the PSOE, the Spanish Socialist Party, passing the buck, incompetence and misleading distortions, trying to point the finger of blame at the regional government of Galicia, whereas in fact it was the regional government of Galicia that was the only party really concerned about minimising the consequences of the incident. Sanchez and his government, if they had a scrap of political dignity, should be asking for forgiveness, particularly from the people of Galicia, because of the awful environmental impact of their policies. I also think it's a bit odd that when we ask for a debate on the rule of law in Spain, we're accused of being too national in our focus, and now suddenly we're accused of being too regional. Well, chapeau to the left.
The next speaker is Mr. Balt.
Panie Przewodniczący,
President, Commissioner, colleagues, 160 tons of plastic pellets and 12 million tons of plastic of various types are spilled into our seas and oceans every year. It is very well known that plastic waste has negative influence for fish and humans who are at risk of consuming it directly or indirectly. The ecological disaster that started off with Portugal but then reached Spanish Galicia can also reach other European coasts. This situation shows us that we definitely need to boost controls of transporting toxic waste around Europe. We also and toxic products around Europe. We have to boost monitoring, and we have to be able to quickly react in line with the principle polluter pays, companies and businesses need to bear more responsibility for any lost containers. It must be more profitable to actually guarantee the security than pay the insurance policy. We also need tools that will help local communities to fight for clean environment. It's the guarantee of our health and health of animals. We cannot let oceans to become a free waste dump. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mrs. Bilbao Barandica. The plastic pellet spill that affects the western coast of the Iberian Peninsula, and especially Galicia, could lead us to a discussion on the local reaction given this accident. But I think there are those who are spending more time on who saw this first and who reported it, instead of focusing on how to apply the lessons we learned after the Prestige spill. This is what we're trying in the Basque Country with a public-private partnership called Itxas Ertza, bringing together the fishing fleet, authorities and scientific institutes. The debate is local and it could spill over into the one here, which of course has to take place. We have to focus on prevention and avoiding new spills and discharges. We have to make sure that the IMO says this material is hazardous. We have to look at transport and monitoring, and the industry, the plastics industry, has to apply technology and innovation to look for alternatives. And we face another challenge. We already decided on the phase-out of single-use plastics. Let us set deadlines so that in the future we transport plastic pellets in a format that, if there is a spill, it can be easy to collect. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Guerrero.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, colleagues. This tragedy, which unfortunately occurred in Galicia and is affecting the coast of Portugal too, does show us one positive point about the EU. Now, you see all kinds of accusations flying back and forth from the far right and so on, but here we see that the EU institutions have actually done a good job. We have legislation in the Parliament, but also internationally, to ensure that the entire production and distribution chain of these goods, which should be considered hazardous materials, is efficient and allowing for a response to such emergencies. The European Maritime Safety Agency, which set up in the aftermath of the Prestige disaster, has now shown us how the EU can respond together. There are a few YouTube clips and TikToks and so on, which explain this a lot forward. I'd be happy to take questions.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Mato.
Gracias, Presidente.
Thank you very much, President. We're worried about the plastic pellet spill lost in Portugal and that is affecting Cantabria, the Basque Country, and Galicia. Of course we're worried, but the nationalist left is only interested in the regional elections in Galicia on the 18th of February. That is why the debate is taking place. They're worried about the fact that there are problems, but the left is only worried or rather interested in making sure that everyone sees the regional government in Galicia in a bad light. And yet we're worried about other things that you are not. The nationalists and the left are only interested in the 18th of February. We're interested in finding solutions for all the beaches affected and making sure that this never happens again. But the left and the nationalists don't care about the fact that their campaign against the junta will affect the fishers in Galicia. It's all about the 18th of February. Unfortunately, there is a deadline to your terrible campaign, and that is the 18th of February. But until then, we will continue along the same track. Despite the socialists and despite the nationalists, we will work for the welfare of the Galicians and all Spaniards, every single Spaniard. Thank you. Mr. Carlos Kind.
You have the floor.
Oui, un point d'ordre.
Yes, a point of order. We needed interpretation from French when Mr. Mato spoke, but we didn't get that. So we didn't, unfortunately, hear what Mr. Mato had to say.
Επιβεβαιώνω ότι δεν είχα και εγώ ελληνική ερμηνεία.
I didn't get Greek interpretation either. Mr. Chahim.
Chair, I will stay on topic. Het lijkt onzichtbaar, maar...
It seems invisible, but it's actually a disaster. It's a disaster that only becomes visible once you take a sieve through the sand, because there are so many small pellets there. It might not seem dangerous, but as microplastic pollution, these pellets are a threat to nature, the environment, but also the fishing industry as well. It's no good having good intentions. To avoid these sort of accidents, everybody concerned, all the stakeholders, have to make sure that these pellets aren't lost, because we need to stop this sort of local disaster, and to do that, the local authorities need to be prepared, and it doesn't seem to be the case here. We also need to wonder why there's so much waste coming. Why do we need all this plastic? We have to deal with our plastic addiction. And the way that plastic is used for bottles and bags, we need to stop those, and we're going in the right direction on that front. But we need to make sure that microplastic pollution doesn't remain invisible in our ecosystems and our environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Rodriguez Ramos.
Thank you, President. 6 containers from the ship Tocanau, 1,050 bags with 25 kilos of pellets in each. An environmental tragedy, but alas, not an isolated case. Between 52,000 and 180,000 pellets are lost in the environment in the EU annually. For that reason, Commissioner, it is absolutely necessary for the pellets regulation to include maritime transport of pellets. It has to be in the scope. We need a European law that will lay down specific obligations for economic operators and those in the transport sector to avoid loss of pellets. But also, Commissioner, we need a law with a clear protocol as to how the 27 EU member states should behave to avoid the kind of events which, unfortunately, we've seen in Spain recently. Since the 8th of December, we don't know what the Spanish government has actually done to stop pellets washing up on the shore, with regional governments asking questions about whether these are toxic or not. For God's sake, plastic in the ocean. It's not good news. So let's end these political battles. The Galician elections will one day be over, but the plastic will still be there on the coast.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mrs. O'Sullivan.
This, my friends, is an oil spill by another name. The spilling of millions of plastic pellets into the Sea of Galicia is a crime. It should be considered as serious as the oil tanker Prestige spill off the coast of Galicia in 2002, or the many other hundreds of environmental disasters we have become familiar with in this plastic age. Unlike the transport of materials like crude oil, which is classified as a hazard to transport, there is still no such regulation for the transport of crude plastics. This must change. The petrochemical plastic industries cannot be defended. We should act like the people of Skibbereen in my constituency in Ireland South, who, when a large multinational tried to build a plastic pellet factory in their beautiful scenic town, they said loud and clear, "We will not support the plague of plastic." And I agree.
Thank you very much. Mr. Milan Mon is the next speaker. Thank you very much, President. Commissioner, as I feared, there's been a lot of exaggeration and lies. I don't think that this debate would be taking place if we didn't have elections around the corner, and this is proof. There's been a dual injustice in Galicia. The government has been aware of the accident. They were aware on the 8th of December, but they only informed the regional government on the 3rd of January. They didn't carry out their duties and they didn't activate the plans necessary. Commissioner Sinkevičius, the Galician regional government is not going to rest until all beaches are clean. It is rolling out and deploying resources by air and at sea, way beyond its powers. There has been a lot of disinformation, lie spill, if you like, a tide of lies from various people saying that photos from Sri Lanka and Texas were actually showing the situation in Galicia, but they weren't. So let us use common sense, let us be reasonable, stop this these electoral maneuvers. It's going to tarnish the image of Galicia and the industry. We're not going to allow this. Thank you.
The
next speaker is Mrs. Schaldemose.
Right now, we're witnesses to an environmental catastrophe on our coasts. The plastic pellets from ships, they contaminate our seas, they wash onto our beaches, and they're being eaten by birds and fishes alike because they look like plankton. They then come into the animals. They won't decompose, and when small fish are eaten by bigger ones, well, the plastic goes along, so our nature suffers. We have to do everything we can to clean this up. We need plastic out of our oceans. That's our task right now. But in the long term, we also need to make sure that an environmental catastrophe like this cannot happen. We need political solutions. In December, 6 containers fell off a ship at the Spanish coast. So we need to be the first here in Europe to suggest that we need better rules. We have better rules. We have to stop this.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Aguilera.
Thank you, President. I'd like to take this first opportunity to express my gratitude to civil society, especially in Galicia. What extraordinary efforts have gone into the clear up and elimination of waste on the coastline of Galicia. We're seeing civil society in Galicia showing that it is definitely up to the task, which I'm not sure that we have shown ourselves to be in this debate. The fisheries sector is a professional one. Let them get on with their jobs. Commissioner, I think you were quite right to say that this new environmental disaster should allow us to put in place effective prevention measures in the EU to avoid future spills and the damage caused by microplastics. Let us learn the lesson from this terrible situation, but we need action. The government of Galicia is showing itself to be highly negligent. We need to avoid the environmental impact. We can do the finger-pointing later. We need to act now. The PP in Spain, the EPP in Europe, and the far right, who seem to have already left, should suddenly be so concerned about this because there are elections coming up. If all the waste that was generated in Spain is mounting up, it would overshadow this sort of pathetic attempt to point the finger at Pedro Sanchez now. It just has no credibility.
So we have come to the end of the list of speakers, and we can move on to the Catch the Eye procedure. I have 7 requests. Given the seriousness of the debate and how important this is, I will accept all 7 requests. Mr. Herbst has 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is a very important issue for all of us in Europe, and it truly is just the tip of the iceberg. So let's just put the election campaigning aside. And my question would be, also to the Commissioner, how did the Spanish government inform you? And how were France, for example, as a neighboring country, informed by the Spanish government? This is a crucial European question. And I recognize that not many colleagues here talked about, for example, the legislative package on maritime security. And I also remember that somebody who spoke 1 month ago here in Parliament, Mr. Sanchez, did not talk about this issue at all. I mean, frankly speaking, did not talk about European issues at all. So my question would be, how did the Spanish government inform the European government?
Σας ευχαριστώ. Επόμενος ομιλητής.
The next speaker is Mrs. Carvalhais.
Caros colegas,
Dear colleagues, millions of pellets on the beaches of Galicia. That is an environmental disaster. The regional authorities can say they're not toxic, but we're talking about non-biodegradable materials on a huge scale that will remain in marine ecosystems for an indefinite period, with a long-lasting effect on those ecosystems and on the fisheries and seafood sectors and those who depend on coastal tourism too. So we need rapid action to minimise the environmental impact and the economic impact too as we go into summer, and we need an EU response showing that we have the necessary measures in place to prevent a replay of this ever. We need to avoid vessels using flags of convenience in order to circumvent security and environmental rules which we have in the EU, because they're much laxer elsewhere. So we do need concrete action, Commissioner.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Solé.
Gracias, President.
Thank you very much, President. I'd like to offer my support to the Galician people. Once again, they're grappling with an ecological disaster affecting their seas and beaches, but they're also dealing with the incompetence of the Galician regional government that reacted too late and badly. Unfortunately, where I come from in Catalonia, we've also grappled with plastic pellet pollution. This is particularly serious, and it affects Pineda near Tarragona and the petrochemical industry there. After having dealt with all those in the value chain and putting forward good practices, and thanks to civil society as well, the Catalan government has taken 8 chemical companies to court, and the public prosecutor has stepped in as well. We have to be able to find what lies behind this, the root causes, and to ensure that there's accountability. We welcome European legislation, Commissioner Sinkevicius, but there should be more tools available to avoid these spills and therefore pollution. There cannot be impunity if there are such disasters. Thank you very much. Mr. Kokalis is next. Thank you very much, President.
Debated about the decision of Norway to drill the deep sea in the Arctic, and we asked for a moratorium. If that doesn't happen and they drill, do you know what they will find? They will find plastic. There's so much plastic. SCA calculated there is 100 billion tons every year. There is a great plastic garbage patch, plastic island in the Pacific Ocean, which is 3 times the size of France. And there are 5 of these islands. And we produce more and more plastic. So, dear Commissioner Sinkevicius, when this mandate began, we talked about a blue deal. And you've done a great job. You pushed forward the ocean agreement in the biodiversity COP15 in Montreal, Kunming. You reached an agreement on the beyond jurisdiction high seas regulation. I think it's time to be serious about our zero pollution commitment on the Green Deal, talk about the next mandate, and realize that we must stop the plastic addiction. Plastics are fossil fuels, and the people of Galicia are suffering from another oil spill, like Grace said, 20 years later. We must deal with that and realize that transitioning away from fossil fuels, as we discussed in COP28, includes getting away from plastics. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Tarabella.
Micro, please.
Chaque année, des millions de tonnes de plastique.
There are thousands of tons of plastic pollution that are being tipped into the sea, which are threatening the environment. According to data, 100,000 mammals in the sea are suffering as a result and are killed. So soon there's going to be more plastic than fish in the sea. But it's also a question of public health, because we're looking at these microplastic pellet pollution, and for our children and their children, they're being threatened. The proposal from the Commission to deal with plastic pellet pollution is a good starting point, but the European Parliament, I think, needs to be more ambitious. It's more than high time to fight this ecological and health disaster. And unfortunately, this is something that seems to be happening again and again.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Cerdas.
Obrigada, Presidente.
Thank you, President, Commissioner, colleagues. We saw a tragic accident with the Prestige 20 years ago. Now we see another environmental tragedy on the same territory with very serious consequences, not only for local communities. It is not a regional problem. This is a European issue. And as Shadow Rapporteur for the new rules, I would say we need much harsher sanctions in order to ensure we have stricter observance of the rules. The competent authorities should have an environmental impact assessment of such disasters and implement preventive measures in order to avoid future environmental disasters. Allow me to conclude by expressing my solidarity with Galicia and my sisters and brothers in Galicia and all those who are working hard to mitigate the consequences of the disaster.
Thank you very much. Mr. Galez, the last speaker under Catch the Eye.
Ja, vielen Dank, Herr Vorsitzender.
Thank you, President. Ladies and gentlemen, 26 tons of plastic pellets. When they fall into the sea, it's tragic, it's an accident, but above all, it shows a lack of responsibility for the companies who are meant to assume responsibility. For the shipping companies who are shipping these pellets, that there is a possibility of them falling in the sea, they have to cover that. And this is the huge problem. Environmental pollution still is too cheap. There's an economic calculation by firms involved that they are willing to run that risk. We need to stop that, and that's why it's so incredibly important that we have rules on plastic pellets that are put in place and ensure genuinely that on an international level, the oceans and the work done in these regions be taken into consideration. Obviously, there's no point if we just make sure that plastic pellets within the internal waterways of the EU aren't lost. We need international standards. We are responsible to the environmental movement and to all of these people who are now spending their time to sift through the sand to get the pellets out again.
Thank you very much. That brings us to the end of the Catch the Eye procedure. Now, Mr. Sinkevičius, Commissioner.
Thank you very much, honourable members. First of all, what's very clear that today's debate shows the importance of tackling pollution by plastic pellets, as well as the complexity of this issue. There are no easy solutions, but we do need bold and decisive action to protect our oceans and to deliver on the zero pollution target. We are committed to reducing plastic litter at sea by 50% and microplastic released into the environment by 30% by 2030. Some may be inclined to look at these targets as sort of nice figures. But when pollution strikes for real, like on the Spanish coast, we see that environmental concerns climb to the top of the political agenda. So the success will depend on our joint, coordinated efforts to support decisive and rapid actions and decisions at all relevant levels. Regarding maritime transport, dear colleagues, I heard your requests and we are ready to consider its inclusion in EU law. For instance, to forbid the carriage of pellets in bulk and work together on ensuring good quality packaging and safe stowage on board ships. We are also calling on all parties involved to act at international levels. We urge all member states to unite their efforts at the International Maritime Organization for a swift conclusion of the deliberations on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The debate is closed. So we can move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the Mato report, Implementation of the Common Fisheries Policy and Future Perspectives. Mr. Mato, the rapporteur, has the floor.
Gracias, presidente. Querido comisario.
Thank you, President, Commissioner. You know how much I appreciate you and your work. I know you don't like me saying this, but we put the ecology environment before economics. Looking at fishers, we have not been respecting good governance, where we should have fishers at the heart of local management. We need a level playing field for European producers to compete with imports. And we're seeing restrictions only on EU producers. A lot of opportunities have been missed here. We could have put the European fisheries sector at the forefront in competitiveness against China, Russia, Norway. We need to promote the strategic role of fisheries and aquaculture in the Green Deal. There's an opportunity to adapt the obsolete and badly adapted CFP that is not suited to new challenges, increase food security and make this profession, which is vital to society, more attractive to young people. Your refusal to open up a debate on reform of CFP has created unprecedented unease, malaise in the fisheries sector. It's been crisis after crisis. We need EU support more than ever. The CFP is badly conceived. In 2013, we introduced rigid political objectives, perhaps rather hastily. At that point, nobody could answer questions about the possible practical consequences of implementing that. And then it turns out that it's impossible to implement them in real life, so nobody trusts the policy. The fisheries sector no longer has any trust in European policy. We do need healthy ecosystems for economic prosperity. Yes, but what the CFP doesn't do is ensure that fish is caught in a sustainable manner rather than being sacrificed on the altar of environmental protection. Realities have moved on since the CFP. There are unpredictable developments since 2012 when the CFP was designed. In parallel with this, we've seen new objectives and priorities such as decarbonisation, landing obligations, maximum sustainable yields that are very difficult to implement. The current CFP does not give us the necessary instruments to achieve those aims. The current CFP does not take account of the specificities of small-scale fisheries, fisheries guilds, outermost regions such as the Canaries. There's a significant socio-economic role for coastal communities in these cases. Fisheries, aquaculture, the entire value chain have strategic importance in the context of the Green Deal. They make a contribution to food security and to our cultural, tourist, gastronomic tradition across Europe. They have strategic value, which we've also seen in the context of Brexit and the COVID pandemic, and indeed the Ukraine war. There's also geopolitical importance. We have long-distance fleets present around the world. Given all of that information, we're continuing to implement our current lacking CFP. It needs revision, it needs reform. Let us not be scared of change and adaptation. I'd like to thank the shadow rapporteurs and Council and Commission for the frank exchanges of views which we have had and for the contributions which you have provided to me during the lengthy process of drafting this report. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Sinkevičius.
Thank you very much, President. Honourable members, given the cumulative crisis we have been or are still faced with, be it climate change or the loss of natural resources, COVID-19 or the energy crisis, it is our collective responsibility to help the EU fishery and aquaculture sectors to become more resilient so that they can continue to provide citizens with high-quality food. I would like to, first of all, start by thanking the rapporteur, Mr. Mato, and all shadow rapporteurs for the work they have put into this report. And I truly welcome that it acknowledges the importance and the merits of the common fisheries policy and of its main objective to achieve environmental, economic, and social sustainability. I agree with you that the compliance and implementation of the landing obligations remain challenging. Your report asks for a socio-economic impact analysis, which the Commission has already carried out in 2022, and which has shown that the landing obligation so far has not had a big impact, including socio-economically, as unfortunately it is not consistently complied with. Regarding the call to assess alternative ways to minimize unwanted catches, we would first need to know what the upcoming evaluation of the landing obligation bring. And as you know well, the European Maritime Fisheries and Aquaculture Fund already provides effective support to more selective and less impacting fishing techniques. One point on which the Commission cannot agree is that to decarbonise our fishing fleet to ensure generational renewal or to increase safety on board, we need to necessarily increase the fishing capacity limits. It is crucial that the size of the fleet remains in balance with the available fishing opportunities, if we want to ensure sustainable fisheries management. Besides, several member states have a non-negligible margin between the active capacity of their fleets and their fishing capacity ceiling, and they can and should allocate this margin where needed to facilitate the modernization of the fleet. I have called on those member states on several occasions to look into this, and I reiterate this call today. Supporting the fishing fleets in its energy transition will remain one of our big joint responsibilities for the years to come. To facilitate this transition, the Commission has already proposed a number of concrete measures under its energy transition initiative, and we have also issued a guide on funding opportunities to support stakeholders in navigating the different types of funding that can be used. The Fishers of the Future project, which we launched last February, will also look at the generational renewal and safety on board. I fully agree with you that the promotion of low-impact aquaculture practices, such as mussel or oyster farming, needs more support. In line with your report, the strategic guidelines on EU aquaculture recognise that future research and innovation is required, in particular on species-specific welfare parameters. The Commission is therefore committed to support such research in the current programming period of EU funds and will certainly support an effective implementation of these strategic guidelines. A number of funding opportunities are available to achieve the energy transition and other objectives under the European Green Deal, including under Horizon Europe and Repower EU. And for that purpose, we also revised the state aid guidelines and ensure the necessary synergies with the European Maritime Fisheries and Aquaculture Fund. Let me also be very clear that the Commission is fully committed to ensure equal treatment of women in the fisheries sector and their improved representation. We have launched a specific call for proposals under the European Maritime Fisheries and Aquaculture Fund to support projects promoting the role of women in the blue economy, the so-called Win Blue and Win Big. I'm grateful to you, Mr. Mato, that in your report you also addressed climate change And in that context, more specifically, the changes we see in the ocean's chemistry and temperature. This is a key challenge, and we need to continue to carefully monitor any future developments and take them into account when taking policy decisions. The European Maritime Fisheries and Aquaculture Fund already helps the fishers and aquaculture sector to adapt to the consequences of climate change. However, the uptake of the available funds by member states has unfortunately been relatively limited until now. So this needs to change, and I count on your support in this regard. Your report also sets out very concrete ideas regarding regional fisheries management organizations. And I can only reiterate the reassurance I have given to you on previous occasions that the rights of the European Parliament regarding the negotiations within these organizations are and will always be fully respected in line with the framework agreement that governs the relations between our two institutions. So the Commission supports the creation of new regional fisheries management organizations. However, this comes with its own set of political challenges. And of course, the Commission remains fully committed to involve the European Parliament in all future policy developments in line with our treaty obligations, in line with our agreed better regulations principles, and it will continue to conduct evaluations or impact assessments when preparing new initiatives involving all stakeholders, including our fishers. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. We'll take the political group speakers. Mr. Milan Mon on behalf of the European People's Party. Thank you very much, President. Commissioner, before anything else, I would like to congratulate my colleague Gabriel Mato for the sterling job that he's done based on consultations. We had COVID-19, the war in Ukraine, Brexit, energy price hikes, and the decarbonization of the fishing fleet, as well as generational renewal and the need for making the landing obligation more flexible. And of course, fishing opportunities are all very important issues, as well as fishing capacity. We need an EU response. We need to reconsider some of the current rules and overhaul the common fisheries policy, the CFP. As Gabriel Mato's report clamors for, we have to make sure that we look at socioeconomic considerations as well. We shouldn't just have an environmental approach. The fishing industry plays a very important role in the European economy, and it needs to continue doing so. And it contributes greatly to producing high-quality animal protein. And we need to have a competitive industry, a competitive on a socioeconomic level as well. We really need to look at how important fisheries is in the Commission. Thank you. Thank you very much. Mrs. Avram on behalf of the Socialists.
În acest mandat s-a vorbit mult.
In this mandate, a lot was said about how fisheries can damage the environment, but too little about how fisheries and aquaculture provide the cleanest animal protein we have and are also a great weapon against climate change. But to use this efficiently, the sector needs an urgent revision to allow it to overcome past challenges and face future ones. In my country, Romania, the fisheries are in troubled, dangerous waters. COVID kept our fishermen on shore for years, then the war in Ukraine started spilling out across the Black Sea, and floating mines have reached Romanian fisheries, endangering boats and lives. So our fishermen were unable to go out to the sea to fish. The economy has suffered alongside with the bioeconomy. Russia's invasion caused considerable financial loss for our fishermen by cutting off their access to the fish and disrupted the Black Sea ecosystem. There is an increase in predatory species and significant damage to biodiversity. Therefore, this report should not fuel what has sadly become a fight between the sector and the environment. We should see this report as an attempt to reconcile the two in the new reality. One where the sector is rapidly aging, where onboard safety must be improved urgently, and where the discrimination against fisheries and agriculture must stop, because both, I repeat, Both play a fundamental role in providing our food and in protecting and preserving the environment. So I ask the Commission to take a realistic and pragmatic approach to the common fisheries policy. Thank you to the rapporteur for the good work and his understanding, and I hope that today's vote will preserve the balanced compromise we were able to reach. Thank you.
Για την ομάδα Renew Europe.
Thank you very much. On behalf of Renew Europe, Mr. Karleskind.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur...
Thank you, President. Commissioner. To sum up, this report says that the CFP as adopted a decade ago is okay. It's working okay. In an ideal world where you have these different fish species, different vessels, identifying them, fishing them, it's all fine. Unfortunately, we need a reality check because fisheries are not actually operating like that. We've seen declines in recent years. We've heard about the crises. We've heard about Brexit, COVID, Ukraine. Fisheries have been profoundly shaken by these crises. So the sector has needed to respond, has needed resilience, and we've been talking about decarbonisation and other priorities. In the French media, in the French Basque Country, they're really on the edge now. They're on the brink. So we need to ensure that we have renewal of our ageing fleet, which is on the verge of collapse, because otherwise fisheries will not be able to cope with another crisis. It will go under. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Scott-Keller on behalf of the Greens.
Dear colleagues, our oceans and seas are central for the human survival. They provide us with the air that we breathe. They function as a massive carbon sink, and many people and communities depend on them for food and for income. They are a treasure that we need to guard closely, but while they seem vast, they're not indestructible. They and all the benefits that we get from them are under threat from pollution, from the climate crisis, and also from overfishing. And the common fishery policy is an attempt to safeguard that common and precious resource that we have, the fish stocks. And it was last reformed in 2013, but it still hasn't been fully implemented. In cases where it was implemented and where scientific advice was followed, where investments in marine protection were made, stock has recovered. And this has benefited the fishers. We have to continue on that path. I would say it's time to double the efforts in order to implement the common fishery policies and to make sure that we safeguard the oceans for future generations. If we want new legislation, then we should look at legislation to double climate protection and to stop the pesticide pollution, for example, that goes into the ocean. Because without fish, there will be no fishers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the ECR, Mr. Russen.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen. With this very balanced report from Mr. Mato on the CFP, we're calling on the Council and the Commission to take into greater consideration the social and economic importance of fisheries and also the important role that fisheries plays in the provision of our food. And this is absolutely necessary because fisheries have had to deal with blow upon blow in recent years. So we really must change course. Unnecessarily restrictive measures that go beyond their goal, such as the landing obligation or the ban on pulse fishing, must be removed from the table. Fishers have to be able to continue to have access to fishing areas, and the TAC and quota system has indeed proved its worth, but in the current form, sometimes it leads to quite drastic annual cuts, and that means that there's a great deal of uncertainty. I can warmly support the rapporteur's appeal for a multi-annual quota. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On behalf of ID, Mrs. Conte. It was back in 2013 when we rushed through a CFP reform. Over the last 10 years, we've gone from a complete lack of fisheries management objectives to political objectives or even electoral ones. And in many cases, or some cases, it's impossible to achieve these goals or very difficult to implement them. So what is the result? Fisher mistrust in politics in the EU because they feel that the measures adopted are unsuitable and not underpinned by science. And then, of course, society has lost their trust in us because they feel that they don't see the benefits to the environment, and this means that they see fishers as outlaws that are enemies of the sea, and they don't see them as contributing to food security. We have to restore balance in the 3 sustainability pillars. Let us give fisheries, aquaculture, and the whole value chain the place that they deserve at the top of the EU political agenda. Thank you. Thank you very much. On behalf of the left, Mr. Pimenta Lopes.
Thank you, President. The highly precarious situation that fisheries are facing now, especially small-scale fisheries, not being helped at all by the CFP. It's not in touch with reality. It's not taking account of the diverse, complex situation of national fishers. It's actually leading to a greater centralisation of operations with liberalisation, deregulation and a lack of support, particularly for small-scale fisheries. The CFP should be focused on local, decentralised management with fishers themselves involved in taking decisions and managing the policies in small-scale coastal and artisanal fisheries specifically in order to ensure its socio-economic viability. This is about sovereignty of member states for their own territory and their own recourses. What sort of fisheries are we going to have without fishers, Commissioner? We need tangible measures in order to ensure the survival of the sector.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Tarabella.
La population mondiale.
The world population is going to reach 10 billion by 2050, and feeding these people will be one of the considerable challenges we need to meet. We have the Sustainable Development Goals from the UN to ensure food security by 2030. I'm sure it's going to be extended to 2050 because we're not going to meet that. To achieve these objectives, we're going to have to change our ways of producing and consuming and our access to food dramatically. Having sustainable fisheries will be essential if we want to meet the future food needs of our world's population, and we have to deploy all methods to make sure that the fisheries sector and agricultural sector in the EU will be able to cope, and it'll be based on ecosystems. We need to focus more on the social aspects here and improving working conditions on board vessels. The common fisheries policy, more than ever, needs to be reformed and adapted as a result of this. Indeed, the common agriculture policy needs to be reformed as well. It needs to be brought in step with the social and ecological challenges of our age.
Thank you very much. Mr. Markey.
Thank you, Chairperson. Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen, the common fisheries policy aims to support fishing communities, sustain fishing stocks, protect the environment and ensure fair distribution of opportunities across the EU. Well, the common fisheries policy is fair for some but not for all. 85% of the fish that's taken out of Irish waters is taken by countries other than Ireland, with Ireland getting 15%. When it comes to reciprocal arrangements with third countries, they're worth about 60 million to third countries, but Ireland gets approximately 1 million in return. When it comes to processing those fish, many of the European fish go to Iceland and Faroe Islands to be processed there, losing the opportunities of the multiplier effect in the local economy off the coast of in Ireland. And finally, this has all been compounded by Brexit. 40% of the value of fish transfers to the UK came from Ireland. 15% of Irish quota was lost to the UK. The common fisheries policies in many ways serves unsustainable fishing by Norway, Iceland and the Faroe Islands at the expense of countries like Ireland. It's a common fisheries policy for countries outside the EU and not for some countries within the EU. And we need to ensure that it's much more sustainable, and we have to make sure that the opportunities out there are for European fishermen in particular. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Matic.
Thank you, President, Commissioner. We cannot expect fishermen to reduce fishing effort or invest money to switch to using sustainable fishing gear while payments for the temporary cessation of fishing activities are delayed by several years. What should people live on? We are aware of the importance of sustainable fisheries for our economy, but we must remind ourselves of the main socio-economic goal of the common fisheries policy, which is a decent standard of living. Socio-economic aspects and security of food supply should be an integral part of the common fisheries policy, but it is necessary to have a balance between ecological, economic and social goals in order to ensure sustainability of fishing communities. There are many challenges, especially in the Mediterranean, where we need to speed up the restoration of fish stocks, and the best solution for this is the new regulation on restoration of nature. Nothing has been done for years, and the fight against illegal fishing is not exclusive or mutually exclusive with the restoration of marine areas. When nature is restored, fish stocks will also increase and people will be able to live from.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Bilbao Barandica is the next speaker. I would like to welcome the approach of this report, which highlights the contribution of the CFP and that advocates improving its socioeconomic and environmental aspects. We need to continue improving fish stocks management, but working hand in hand with those who earn a living from it and not against them. That is really a good move. We need to make sure that the CFP reflects the diversity of the sector, includes it in the definition of small-scale fisheries, and allows for fleet renewal, which is key for decarbonization to improve safety, working conditions, and making the sector more appealing and generational renewal. We agree that we have to overhaul the landing obligation and other flaws because it's easy to put things on paper, but reality doesn't reflect it. A fisheries commissioner could deal with these mistakes and make sure that the seas and oceans are reflected in farm to fork, and make sure that we have labeling standards and rules that avoid plant-based products being labeled as something that will never be fisheries. So we have to deal with the flaws of the CFP. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Ilčić.
Poštovani kolege, podržavam.
Colleagues, I support this report because it puts the focus on the balance between three main pillars of the common fisheries policy, which is food supply, protection of fish stocks, and socio-economic needs of the fishermen. Among others, this report, according to the principle of subsidiarity, calls for more respect for local government. So therefore, I have proposed an amendment on the need of reopening the Mediterranean regulation, which was outdated because it dates back to 2006. And it is therefore a barrier to especially small coastal fisheries, which is 85% of the European Mediterranean fleet, in Croatia even more. So with this regulation on small coastal fisheries, here the restrictions are the same for small fisheries as for the industrial fisheries. So since now all these restrictions are in force, the small fishermen are now catching fish which are overfished by industrial fisheries. So I call on you to support my amendment, not to be slaves to formalism. We need to have courage to change documents which have not proven their value in practice. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Jamet.
Oui.
Yes, we're at an important crossroads, facing increasing imports and regulation from the European Union. But don't come along and talk about the Green Deal inspired by the global environmental movement and telling us how to do our work here. Because there are fisheries agreements that can be reached with Mauritania or Senegal, for example, and the European Union is allowing, through being financed, having the oceans emptied. Because if we're going to talk about coastal fisheries, artisanal fisheries, then we also have to talk about the economy and food security here as elsewhere. And if we're talking about future perspectives, we must bear in mind that this deal that you think is a juicy one, in due time will lead to disastrous changes which will lead to problems around the world, but also it will come back as a butterfly's wings impact would have on us, and we'll be ruined as well.
Thank you very much, President. I'd like to start by congratulating Gabriel Mato on the excellent work which has gone into this report. We do indeed need a serious, modern reform of the CFP. That is what the report calls for. We need a reform which takes a balanced approach to economic and social conditions rather than taking a basically environmental approach. Only that angle. This is not a subjective opinion. This is a conviction backed up by the facts that we need to renew the fisheries fleet urgently, especially in the outermost regions. The Azores and Madeira and Portugal are coping with an obsolete fleet as best they can, but this is not only a problem for them in socio-economic terms, it's a problem for the environment too. So, Commissioner, with no further delay, let us provide determined support to the fisheries sector, our fishers and the future of our seas.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Chabot.
Monsieur le Commissaire, chers
Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to contribute to this debate by replacing an overall approach to, the common fisheries policy and put it in a broader context. No, I'll start that again. I'd like to put this debate in the broader context of the oceans as a whole rather than in a siloed fashion. And as an MEP, I'm not going to call into question the CFP, the Common Fisheries Policy, which of course is essential at a European level for fishers. But fishers and the world maritime situation, given invasive species, pollution, energy used in maritime levels, etc., ocean fishers are at the crossroads of all of these different issues. So for their future, it's absolutely essential that ecosystems are preserved because people are dependent on those, but also that there's a transition. Now, the future European Commission in its portfolio and the Commission as a whole needs to reflect what's at stake in the world seas in its integral fashion, and also any future committee in the European Parliament needs to look at what's at stake for the seas in a broader vision. I think we need to understand that. We need to have a more strategic approach, and so we need to have a blue deal.
Thank you very much. Mr. Frangos. Thank you very much, President. Now, to the Greek government, let me say that the report is asking for this. Member states have to step up their efforts to fight against illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing, and to make sure that the consumption of fish doesn't support illegal fishing. Regulation 1005/2008 is a European tool in order to block imports, fish imports from Turkey, a fish that is fished illegally in the Aegean Sea. The Turkish fishers are just doing whatever they want in the Aegean Sea. They are ignoring the borders, and and they are supported by the Turkish Coast Guard that attack Greek fishers. We would also like to say that the report is asking for safer conditions on European vessels because there are shortcomings. We don't need to spend more money on this. We can actually achieve it by saving money. The less money goes to the Turkish Coast Guard and to the Turkish budget as a whole, the more safety and security for European vessels and Greek vessels. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Frankos. Now for 1 minute, Mr. Keller.
Overall, the EU was very supportive of Ireland during the Brexit negotiations, and the Irish people appreciate what the EU did for us. However, on the issue of fisheries, Commissioner, Ireland lost out heavily. By 2025, Irish fishers will have been forced to accept a 15% cut in quotas, approximately 50 million per annum. This is a huge blow to our fishing industry, most of which is concentrated in a small number of towns and villages. We have seen jobs being lost in our fishing co-ops, and a large number of boats are being decommissioned. So in any upcoming review of the common fisheries policy, Ireland needs to see additional quota being allocated to it. It is only right and fair. Irish fishers are heavily limited in the amount of fish that they can catch in Irish waters. They see factory ships from other member states, or worse, from third countries, entering rich Irish fishing waters and catching multiples of what they are allowed to catch. We need fairness in how quotas are allocated, and we need common sense when it comes to sharing or transferring quota between member states. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kelleher. This brings us on to Catch the Eye. Starting with Ms. Carvalhais.
Caros colegas.
Colleagues, fisheries and aquaculture activities must be environmentally sustainable in the long term. They also require consistent forms of management with achievable objectives, economic and social benefits, making it very clear that this tripartite sustainability needs to be based on the best available scientific data, and we need environmental impact assessments of any decisions which are taken. The CFP needs to be balanced. It needs to go hand in hand with other measures so that it's transparent and fair for long-term fisheries and aquaculture activities. It needs to be situated within an economy which is increasingly a circular economy, a digitalised economy. We need to take account of the energy transition too, but we also need to remain globally competitive. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Carvalhais. Now,
Excuse me. Es folgt Frau Kollegin.
now Ms. Rose.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President. The 2013 reform of the CFP has reduced overfishing, which is of great benefit to fishers, but all too often the CFP is not fully applied. The landing obligation has been largely weakened through exemptions. Ecosystem-based fisheries management is still in its infancy. Article 17 of the CFP, which requires member states to allocate fishing quotas using social and environmental criteria, and which is intended to protect small-scale fishers, is not being applied by member states. Last week, I met 2 young trawlers in Brittany. They've decided to adopt environmentally friendly practices, but because of a lack of ecosystem-based fisheries management, the pollock population, which accounted for 70% of their catches, has collapsed. As a result of the failure to apply Article 17 of the CFP, they find themselves without any quota for 2024, whereas the trawlers will have one. This is all topsy-turvy. It's cockeyed. So before embarking on a risky reform as this report proposes, let's apply the current law in full. Finally, this report calls for animal welfare to be taken into account at last in aquaculture, but not in fisheries. I invite you to vote for our amendment to correct this. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Frau Kollegin.
Thank you, Ms. Rose. Now, Mr. Kelly.
At the recent Parliamentary Partnership Assembly meeting in the House of Commons, we discussed fisheries, and we'll be making recommendations as a result. One of the points came across clearly was that Irish fishers, both in the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, have lost out heavily as a result of Brexit, and we will be making recommendations how that can be amended. Also, we looked at the annual quota, which makes no sense, because if we, for instance, had to have an election every year, how could we function? The same for fishers. They need a multi-annual, the same as in the CAP, at least 5 years. And as well as that, we need to look at processing. Carrying fish all halfway around the world to process it, when it should be processed as close as possible to the landing port, makes absolute sense. And that's what we should be doing in the future. And of course, it shouldn't help third countries, particularly countries like Norway and Iceland and others, when European fishers are discriminated against.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kelly. Mr. Wallace.
President, Commissioner, the Common Fisheries Policy needs to be urgently amended to address the hugely disproportionate impact of Brexit on Irish fishing industry. Ireland needs to see some genuine burden sharing whereby all coastal member states share the pain of Brexit equally and proportionally. Ireland got an increase in its mackerel quota last month, worth about €3 million, but put it in context. The Irish mackerel sector is the most valuable sector for the Irish fleet, but it was hit hardest by the Brexit deal, with a 26% cut in Ireland's quota share, which was worth over €28 million to Irish fishing. Commissioner, you spoke of equal treatment. Well, Irish fishermen and women need to get fair share of fishing rights to the fish that spawn and breed in Irish waters. The CFP allows foreign boats to catch up to 85% of the fish in Irish waters, yet Irish boats get no reciprocal access to the waters of other member states. The CFP shafted Irish fishermen and women from the very start.
Thank you, Mr. Wallace. Now, Ms. Aguilera.
Gracias, Presidente.
Thank you very much, President. I think that this is a sound report, and I'd like to congratulate Mr. Mato, Mrs. Avram, and the other shadows, because it helps us think about the fact that we need to overhaul the CFP, at least some aspects of it. One aspect is that we have developed the environmental aspect, but I don't think we've fleshed out socioeconomic aspects well enough, and they mustn't fall by the wayside. We need all three pillars. We need fleet renewal. We need to grapple with energy transition, and the CFP also has to rise to the occasion. I think we need a better definition of small-scale fisheries. We're not providing small-scale fisheries with enough support, and one of the reasons that we're falling short of this is that because we need a better definition of small-scale fisheries. We also need to boost aquaculture. I know that this falls within the remit of the member states, but we could do more. I think that we need this reform. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Aguilera. That brings to a conclusion the Catch-the-Eye procedure, and to close the debate, Mr. Sinkiewicz, speaking on behalf of the Commission.
Thank you very much, President, honourable members. It was a truly rich debate, and of course, thank you for a variety of views that you have expressed. Let me react to some which I found most important, which were repeated by a few members of the Parliament. First of all, on the reform of common fisheries policy. The existing legislative framework provides the stability the fisheries sector needs. Several challenges have been identified to the successful implementation of the common fisheries policy, and initiatives announced in the fisheries and oceans package address these challenges. So the focus should be now, of course, on implementation and ensuring stability to our fishers. As regards the MSY, where MSY has been implemented, stocks have increased. Catches and incomes are improving, and impacts on the marine environment have decreased. Dear colleagues, these are real, tangible achievements which we have set out in our annual communications on the common fisheries policy. Returning back to landing obligation, which I already addressed in my introductory remarks, we need improved control and enforcement at all levels. As now also reflected in the recently revised EU fisheries control system, as well as the further use of more selective fishing techniques, the Commission will evaluate the landing obligation. Prior to that, throughout 2024, a study will be carried out to feed into the evaluation. So the Commission agrees that the objective to be reached to fish more selectively. Now, social pillar, which has been mentioned a lot, and we've had constant exchanges, which is absolutely critical for our fishers. The social pillar is crucial. It's crucial for the fisheries, aquaculture sectors within the context of the common fisheries policy, but also for policy making and implementation regarding the other blue sectors. So this overarching social objective is key to ensure generational renewal in fisheries. It is also essential for strong and resilient coastal communities. So we, of course, want to ensure that no one is left behind, and social pillar is a strong key part of the CFP. Very shortly, the Commission launched a new EU-wide participatory foresight project to forecast the role of fishers in the society, called Fishers of the Future. Fishers are facing a multitude of new challenges: climate change, more and more competition for marine space, raising costs, and the need to transition to greener energies, amongst others. And this project wants to look ahead and understand how fishers, including the small-scale operators, envisage their future. On small-scale fisheries, which was also mentioned in Article 17 of the CFP, the Commission is working with Member States and the Scientific and Technical Economic Committee for Fisheries to assess the approach in Member States for allocating their fishing opportunities, to ensure the transparency of criteria applied and their conformity with the CFP provisions, and encourages, of course, the use of criteria that can foster sustainable fishing practices and support small-scale and coastal fisheries. The last thing, level playing field. I know this is important, and I can reassure you that this is as equally important to the Commission. The Commission is fully committed to further promote level playing field for EU fishers, where they operate with the third countries' operators. So the fight against illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing will also continue to be a key priority for us. Dear members of the Parliament, dear colleagues, trust and engagement between all stakeholders, from producers to policymakers, is key to achieving our sustainability objectives and to strengthening our open strategic autonomy in the areas of fisheries. This is why we have called on Member States, fisheries stakeholders and the scientific community to join us in a Fisheries and Oceans Pact, to reconfirm our joint commitment to fully implement the current policy and to contribute to necessary reflections and assessment of the certain elements of the common fisheries policy. And this will then contribute to a discussion between fisheries managers and stakeholders on future-proofing the policy in terms of both social and environmental resilience. So today's debate has been an important moment in this regard. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Sinkevicius. Now to finish the debate, Mr. Mato, the rapporteur.
Thank you, President. I'd like to start by thanking all those of you who have spoken. Commissioner, stability of something that's not working is pointless. We need a paradigm shift for the CFP, going from rigid, unrealistic targets to pragmatic, achievable objectives in line with the new post-Brexit, post-COVID, post-Ukraine war reality. We need to adapt this to the real world. The CFP reform needs to strike a new balance between its different objectives with a stronger socio-economic and food security strand. We also need to ensure that we strengthen our international competitiveness. Fisheries and aquaculture deserve pride of place in EU policy and in the Commission. In the previous Commission. They identified the need to produce more fish and seafood as a strategic objective. This is more important than ever, but it's not worth the paper it's printed on as an objective. We need to look at our external policy, put fisheries into a broader political context, looking at our external relations with third countries, Russia, the UK and others, know how important fisheries are in geopolitical terms, but the EU is hesitant, taking baby steps. My heart is in the Canaries, and my message to the outermost regions is I know you need our support. I know you need state aid and EU aid to renew your obsolete local fleets. That's not a luxury. That's a question of survival for coastal communities in those territories. And I say to this Parliament, Council and Commission that you've not taken sufficient account of that. Commissioner, I hope you will listen carefully to what we have said. Now, I know I'm speaking for many people in the sector. I've listened to them and taken their views on board, and we've taken petitions in this Parliament too. So I'm speaking on their behalf too.
Thank you, Mr. Mato. That brings the debate to a close. The vote will take place today. Next item on our agenda is Mr. Herbst's report on the EU Action Plan, Protecting and Restoring Marine Ecosystems for Sustainable and Resilient Fisheries. The rapporteur will start with having the floor for 4 minutes.
Herr Präsident.
Thank you very much, President. Sometimes in our political areas in Brussels or here in Strasbourg, in our bubbles, we forget what things are about in our discussions, in our negotiations, in our debates. So maybe I can just recall what's happened. About half a year ago. We had an action plan that was ambitious, that was important, but that gave rise to criticism, not just here in the Parliament, but in the Council as well, but moreover in amongst the fishers and those who'd invested a lot of money. A lot of the criticism may have been a little exaggerated, as can happen in politics, but some of the core issues contained grains of truth. Let us recall that back then, at home, where fishers were being hit, representatives of the Greens and the Social Democrats were saying, oh, we don't want this either. We don't want general bans. It wasn't up to you, Commissioner. It was Ms. von der Leyen. You know how things are in politics. But at the same time, at this juncture, I'd like to make it very clear that there were very clear points of criticism. And political communication is one such criticism that's been raised, a criticism about discussion within the Commission, and that the legislative value of what's being discussed here and the general approach of having these bans are things that need to be looked at. I don't think in the future we'll be able to say to the fisheries sector, we're not going to have any bans on anything ever, anywhere. Everything's fine, you just carry on. That's not the point. But we have to move away from general bans. It's important to note that in the meantime, numerous scientific studies have been produced which show in a very granular way the impacts that this would have on fisheries. The same scientists that you take seriously and take advice from. So it's not that you pick and choose your scientists, you just need to listen to them. In my report, I avoided trying to put forward an alternative action plan with specific species, specific gear. We want to have, throw out a lifeline. We want to say what is not on. We want to say that we want regional solutions in the future. We want to speak with the stakeholders, not act against their interests. And in the Fisheries Committee, we got a very clear majority here, even though there are a number of amendments on the table that I view critically, because it does change the balance of this report, and because some of them are actually out of scope. So we don't want to put forward an alternative plan. We want to concentrate on the main planks here. Some amendments go so far that they're talking about relations with third countries. Do we really want to dictate in this report how we deal with the UK in future? I don't think that's a good idea. And hence, once again, we have included guidelines for the future Commission, guidelines at a politically difficult time, so that the fishery sector can be told we're going to be working with you, not against you. It's not always going to be easy, but we want to listen to you. We want regional solutions. We don't want general bans. And I hope that all the colleagues dealing with fisheries, those who've tabled these amendments, that you stick to that spirit, because if we can adopt this report as is, we'll have a good position as a point of departure for the Parliament with the majority, so that we'll look to a new era for the Parliament, for the Commission, saying to fishers, we are at your side. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Rapporteur. Now for the Commission, Mr. Sinkevicius.
President, honourable members, first of all, let me thank the rapporteur, Mr. Herbst, the shadow rapporteurs, and of course the European Parliament for this report and for their contributions to the discussions on the Marine Action Plan. It's important that these discussions are taking place publicly, as they touch upon fundamental questions on how we see the future of our fisheries sector and of the natural resources on which this sector fully depends. And thanks to our common fisheries policy, we have already seen good results regarding the sustainable exploitation of commercial fisheries species. Fishing at sustainable level clearly pays off economically. And this is a collective achievement. First of all, due to hard efforts of our fishers across Europe, of which, of course, we can all be proud, and which should encourage us to continue our efforts so that we can achieve such positive developments in all sea basins. But fishing at sustainable levels will not be enough to keep fisheries economically viable. We must go beyond and also look at how we can better preserve the ecosystems that allow fish stocks to thrive. Of course, and let me be very clear about this, the degradation of the marine ecosystem is not provoked by fishing alone. This is why we are always looking at the ocean in a coherent and comprehensive manner, asking all sectors, all stakeholders to step up and do their part. We know that our fishers cherish the sea, they are the guardians of the sea, and we respect their role. The Marine Action Plan is a part of the Fisheries and Ocean Package, which, as you know, looks at all challenges affecting Europe's fisheries today. The state of the marine ecosystem depends on the need to ensure level playing field within and outside the European Union, the dependency on fossil fuels and generational renewal. It's all about increasing resilience. And restoring biodiversity is one of the ways to make the fishery sector more resilient, so that our fishermen and women can continue providing high-quality seafood. And this requires actions, not only at EU level, but also globally, to enhance the environmental standards at international levels. In the Marine Action Plan, the Commission focuses on marine protected areas. When successfully implemented, marine protected areas offer large socio-economic benefits, especially for coastal communities and sectors like fisheries and tourism. Your report calls for scientific studies regarding the establishment of marine protected areas. When preparing this action plan, the Commission based itself on scientific data, which is why we proposed a targeted regional approach, adapted to the specific needs, realities and challenges in each region. We do not want a one-size-fits-all approach. We want regionalization to work. And it starts to work. Not as effectively as we, of course, have hoped for, but we have continued to firmly believe that this is the right way to go. And that's why our Marine Action Plan calls on Member States to step up their efforts. And let me come back to the importance of science. Scientific studies, they show that increasing the mesh sizes and minimum landing sizes enable the youngest fish to remain in the water, therefore increasing the chances for fish populations to reproduce. The action plan includes specific measures in that regard. We want to encourage and finance more work and studies to design the most suited management options, which can lead to a healthier fish populations that will bring higher yields per fishing trip and allow reducing fuel consumption. Again, the action plans include specific measures in that regard. Concerning eel protection, we are on the same line and continue to count on your support. The eel regulations need to be fully implemented to ensure an effective protection of this iconic species. Finally, let me also say a few words on bottom trawling, which we have discussed extensively over the last year and which is only one area we address in our action plan. We do not propose a blanket ban on bottom fishing or any other technique, but we remain convinced that we need to move to less damaging fishing techniques where possible and encourage massive innovation on this regard, funded for our fishers. Some of those techniques, they are already available and they are ready to be deployed more widely. Honourable members, I would like to thank you once again for the open, frank discussions we have had over the last year. A lot of follow-ups remain to be done, but I'm convinced that with a constructive approach and close cooperation among all institutions and stakeholders, we will manage to make the progress. And the biggest winners of that are going to be our fishers and coastal communities across Europe. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Commissioner Sinkevičius. Now, Ms. Chabot for 1 minute.
Thank you very much. Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen, the Commission has put forward this action plan because the situation is urgent and because our legislative framework falls short of what we need. We need to restore marine ecosystems that are in a worse and worse situation. There are human activities at sea, especially fishing, that has an impact. But we need to have resilient fishing and aquaculture. And in order to do so, scientists are unanimous. We have to regenerate marine ecosystems and not just focus on fish sectors. The fishing gear isn't selective enough. Now, trawlers, bottom contacting gear, these are all issues and problematic. We need to have ecological fishing. It is necessary. We need to protect this common good of the ocean. But I will have some problems with the situation at the moment. I wouldn't support them. We need to be ambitious. The EU has to be a trailblazer, and I think that this action plan is an opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Chabot. Now, for 1.5 minutes, Mr. Mato.
Thank you, President, Commissioner. We've already held a lot of discussions so far this morning, but it is true that this sector is facing a very difficult situation. And I think in coastal communities, people see the EU as sort of endlessly dictating ever stricter requirements without taking account of their needs. They see co-legislators as disconnected from reality. Fisheries and aquaculture are vital to the Green Deal, and they provide healthy food, which is particularly important in times of crisis. So we need to ensure food security, economic growth, social well-being. These are all vital too, and need to be better integrated into the decision-taking process. The importance of fisheries should be valued, not finger-pointing and indicating that fisheries is sort of the source of all evil, which is unfortunately the reading that one could give to some of these points. Eliminating bottom trawling from a third of the world's oceans by 2030 is an unfair prioritization. We can still fish in a sustainable fashion. This is a simplistic application of tailor-made measures. We need to use the best available scientific data. We need better lawmaking, and we should not be changing the report through amendments which fail to take account of the needs of fishers.
Thank you, Mr. Mato. Now for 2 minutes, Mr. Bartolo.
Thank you very much, President. Commissioner, protecting our seas and the environment is something very close to my heart. It's not just a duty, it's a task that should involve all of us, because we need to guarantee a future for future generations. Fishers are the guardians of the seas. They defend biodiversity because their livelihood and our food depends on it. This resolution has brought us together so that we can make sure that in the near future our fisheries will be more sustainable. But at the same time, we mustn't forget ancillary challenges linked to CFP management. We have to think about ecological disasters such as the ones that have affected Galicia. The images of plastic pellets washing up on the shores really upset me. We have to make sure that we strike a balance shown by the CFP. Now, environmental aspects have to go hand in hand with socioeconomic aspects. We need more responsible fisheries management. It's vital for the future of our seas and oceans. Every place is different. It has unique features, and we have to work together, listening to everyone and making sure our work is underpinned by scientific evidence. And we need to look at all possible impacts. We need to walk the path of a just transition, but we also have to work on a global stage to fight against IUU carried out by third countries, especially in the Mediterranean. We need to have more stringent international standards. It is an important step to protect our seas, oceans, fishers, because otherwise our continuous efforts would be in vain. We need to walk the path of just transition that doesn't leave anyone behind. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bartolo. Now, for 1 minute, Mr. Christensen.
Kommissær, formand.
Thank you, Commissioner, Chairman, dear colleagues. The proposal for a total ban on bottom trawl is one of the worst things I've seen. It's designed at a desk. Our fishers deliver some of the greenest, healthiest, best food. We should be proud of that. So I really hope that Parliament will say that the compromise proposals from the Fisheries Commission are the ones we should vote through. It's really important for me that the fishers should have a plan they can live with and live from. At least, as a bare minimum, they should be at the negotiation table. We need to listen to the fishermen when proposals are made with consequences this dire, because they make sure we have healthy, green, nutritious food on our plates, even if it's caught with bottom trawl, because bottom trawl can easily be sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Christensen. Now for 1 minute, Ms. Rose.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, are we going to bury any objective to protect the oceans, or are we going to begin the transition to fishing that is more respectful of marine ecosystems? That's what today's vote is all about. Through a lack of political courage and electoral calculations, the right and its allies, the grave diggers of the oceans, are today proposing a demagogic and dangerous report that ignores scientific warnings, plays down the impact of bottom trawling, refuses to recognise the benefits of marine protected areas, and is leading European fishing into a dead end. Faced with the collapse of biodiversity and climate change, we cannot bury our heads in the sand. With its action plan, the European Commission has had the merit of proposing a series of important measures and recognising the impact of bottom trawling on the seabed. The transition to low-impact fishing must begin now. A fair, medium to long-term transition, giving fishers visibility and anticipating crises. Incentive-based distribution of fishing quotas, a gradual end to bottom trawling in marine protected areas, and a reduction in bycatches are all necessary measures that can be used as tools in this transition. It takes courage to tell the truth.
Thank you, Ms. Rose. Now for 1 minute, Mr. Ruijsen. Thank you, President, Commissioner. Today, we're not giving a green light for the Marine Ecosystem Action Plan, but we are putting forward a resolution that sets out some fundamental objections both to the approach and the content. The Commission, as of 2030, is expecting there to be the Member States to implement a ban on all bottom contact fisheries in nature areas. But there's no impact assessment that's been carried out here. So there are all sorts of question marks that remain here. When it comes to the content, nature varies greatly. Where in one area a bottom contact can be damaging, it need not be the case in another. And this action plan doesn't take sufficient account of that. Moreover, we're making ourselves more dependent on imports. For example, for the Dutch shrimp fishery, 80% of which is carried out in Natura 2000 areas, there'd be no future at all. So the action plan, President, hasn't been thought through sufficiently. It's not proportionate. Our fishers deserve better.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege Reussen.
Thank you, Mr. Reussen. Now for 1.5 minutes, Ms. Conte.
La fine della pesca a strascico.
An end to trawling. This is what Europe is asking for through its action plan. Now, the fishing fleet is up in arms, and of course we hear the alarm bells of the other 7,000 vessels that might end up having to close shop. But obviously, Commissioner, you haven't been hearing this. So what else do fishers have to do to be heard? Why are you ploughing ahead with proposals that will deal a huge blow to an EU sector that contributes to 25% of all fish landings and 38% of revenue? Do you want to flood our markets with third country imports? Because that will be the only way to deal with the increasing demand if you destroy European trawling. And European fishers, however, already respect the most stringent rules in the world, making them guardians of best fishing practices. That's why the action plan should protect the environment and biodiversity by taking a cross-cutting and holistic approach instead of homing in on fishing activities only, especially if we bear in mind that marine protected areas were set up in order to protect natural resources, while seabeds would be managed on a case-by-case basis, on a local basis. We need clarity, especially when it comes to the binding aspects of the plan, and we need a bit more realism when dealing with environmental and economic problems in the EU.
Vielen Dank, Frau Kollegin.
Thank you, Ms. Conte. Now for 1 minute, Ms. Hazekamp.
Ja, dank u wel, voorzitter.
Thank you, President. Healthy oceans form the basis for all life on Earth, but plastic pollution with fertilizers and chemicals is threatening life underwater, and the greatest threat comes from fisheries. With devastating bottom trawl nets, the world seas are being plundered right down to the sea floor. Even protected marine areas are not safe and are being emptied of fish. Finally, there's an action plan that's being put forward to get rid of the worst fisheries methods and ban them in sensitive areas. But even this sensible rule is threatened to be blocked by the European Parliament, and that means that Conservative politicians are threatening the world's oceans even further and threatening the very fishermen that they claim to be supporting. Fishers will have no future, like other humans and animals, without healthy oceans. So we reject this report and give a voice to the oceans. So reject this report. It's as being short-sighted. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Frau Kollegin.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hazekamp. Now for 1 minute, Mr. Tarabella.
Les données scientifiques sont...
Scientific information is clear. Looking at the combined effort of reduction of biodiversity, environmental degradation through to pollution in our ocean systems means that they're not working properly as ecosystems. They can't meet the role of providing oxygen, food and subsistence and welfare for the world's populations and the ocean flora and fauna. Now, we need to see an improvement. If we don't, then, well, fisheries needs to be organised differently. We should see trade of fish done differently around the world, as with agricultural produce as well. This needs to be enlightened, it needs to be sustainable, it needs to be based on ecosystems, and to do what needs to be done, we need to work with all the stakeholders on the basis of better and best scientific advice, taking into consideration all the impacts that would be run by changes to gear used by, and also talking to local fishermen.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege Tarabella. Es folgt
Thank you, Mr. Tarabella. Mr. Milan Mon for 1 minute.
Presidente, comisario.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. I hope the EPU will take a very strong approach and adopt a clear position. I'd like to congratulate Mr. Herbst. Acting doesn't mean that we're instituting a ban. We don't want to point the finger at bottom trawling, which is highly regulated, and it's thanks to bottom trawling that we can eat fish species that need bottom trawls to be fished and that play a very important role on our tables. Look at the technical measures regulation when it comes to trawling. Now, we also have to look at the October 2022 Implementing Act that banned bottom trawling from 88 areas in the world, but without any solid scientific evidence and without distinguishing between different types of fishing gears. Trawling is different to longliners, for example. I'd like to ask the European Commission what it's waiting for to review its act, to get all the necessary data and to exclude longliners. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege Milan Mon. Es folgt
Thank you, Mr. Milan Mon. Now for 1 minute, Ms. Carvalhais.
Caros colegas.
Colleagues, Commissioner, protecting marine ecosystems is an ethical imperative for the future of humanity itself. These ecosystems face enormous challenges such as climate change, acidification, pollution, and overfishing. So nobody in good faith can say that we don't need urgent measures or that we don't need to adapt fishing gear to the places where it is used. But it is precisely on this point, the generalisation about impacts, that the action plan has its biggest flaw. Firstly, the environmental impact of a fishing gear is not the same wherever it is used. Secondly, we need to know what the social and economic impacts are of discontinuing a fishing gear. And we need to know how we're going to help the communities most affected by these impacts. I'd like to end by emphasising that the Commission's efforts to achieve a more consistent implementation of EU environmental policy through this plan are to be welcomed, but I must remind you that fisheries management measures emerge and must always emerge from the ordinary legislative process. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Frau Kollegin Carvalho.
Thank you, Ms. Carvalhais. Now for 1 minute, Mr. Carlos-Kint.
Merci, Monsieur le.
Thank you very much, President, Commissioner. Along the French coast for several months or even years, people have been coming along, meeting and looking at the marine protected area by marine protected area, Natura 2000 zone, Nature 2000 zone, seeing how we can reduce the impact of fisheries on these areas. It's called risk analysis. Now, what's happening is the fishers, who are experts about these areas, they know what's going on, and they discuss with scientists, but they discussed with university bodies and agencies in France. I'd like to thank them for their work too, who have very detailed knowledge because they're the ones who drew up these marine protected areas. And they look at how can we make sure that we can restrict, get rid of, possibly ban this or that form of fishing. That's how you should act to protect our ecosystems. What I'm trying to say here is that we should not be trying to dictate from Brussels, so we shouldn't over-administer fishers. It's on the ground with the fishers themselves that this should be done. Thank you very much, Mr. Carlos-Kint. Mr. Neshi now for 1 minute.
Thank you. The action plan presented in March 2023 by you, Commissioner, clearly shows that the only goal is to throw a spanner in the works of fishing just for ecological reasons and ecological idealism. Why do you want to impose terror and restrictions on a sector that has been greatly affected by global problems? Now, in the case of some areas, this is the only source of food and revenue. Now, we have to think about what is happening outside the EU as well. We need to put an end to these stringent rules that are penalizing our fishing fleets. The only effect that it is having is to increase imports from activities that aren't transparent. We will always be on the side of fishers and do everything we can to protect one of the most productive economic sectors for the Italian economy.
Thank you, Mr. Neshi. Mr. Neshi? Mr. Neshi?
Do you allow a question of colleague Roos? No. So we follow. Next speaker is Mrs. Jamet for 1 minute.
Oui.
Yes. Now, in the 21st century, we have a new El Dorado. We're more familiar with the surface of the moon than our seabed. Now, supposedly, setting this huge priority on the seabed means that our maritime environment is given this new value, and now we talk about restoration of marine ecosystems. And what about terrestrial land-based pollution, coal mining and so on? In the Alps, we see development of fuels and fertilizers which are environmental. We absorb CO2. We represent less than 1% of world production. What we need to have is industrial fisheries and aquaculture with an overall action plan in the round that takes account of all these different factors without hitting small-scale fisheries so much, and making a true contribution to restoration of our ecosystems and the survival of small-scale fisheries.
Thank you, Ms. Jamet. Now for 1 minute, Ms. Piribakas.
Monsieur le Président.
President, ladies and gentlemen, I could say that the action plan put forward by the Commission has its faults, but that can happen if you only take one approach, one view. You need to have a reasonable approach. The two objectives could be achieved to help fishers. They're fantastic people who assume responsibility, who pursue the most dangerous career in the world with alacrity. We need to associate these people in all decisions and make sure we understand and value their actions and the way they do things. Rapporteur, we know that this plan should not be to replace fishers. We know that there are things that can be done. Of course, we mustn't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And so the Commission needs to go back to the drawing table, come up with a less dogmatic approach, less dogmatic action plan, which respects the fishers and the ecosystems. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Piribakas. Now for 1 minute, Mr. Bellamy.
President, Commissioner, this is probably going to be one of the last debates that we're going to have on fisheries in this Parliament's term. Unfortunately, so many fishers are saying they can no longer do their job because of the straitjacket imposed on them. But the Commission refuses to listen to what is happening. And now the Bay of Biscay will be closed very soon to fishing. And you want to ban certain fishing gear that is necessary. In France, 1/3 of our sea areas would be affected. So this is added to the CFP, the Fisheries Control Regulation. Where is the regulatory consistency? Where is the scientific evidence? Where is the impact assessment? The truth is that we We import 3/4 of fisheries products that we consume. Everything that we do against fishers will fly in the face of the environment and ocean protection. And thanks to Nicholas Herbst, we are stating this in this report. It is vital that the next Parliament changes course and that we save oceans with fishers on our side and never against them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bellamy. For 1.5 minutes now, Mr. Campomenozzi.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Commissioner, for attending. Looking at the text, several significant amendments, including those from my groups, have been approved. What we're seeing now in Parliament is a majority that is in favour of a new approach, not hyper-regulation, not criminalisation of the fisheries sector. They're fed up with policies which have been punitive for them and excessive and indeed unjustified in previous years. Fisheries as a sector has moved with the times, has adapted. Fish stock management is important to them too. So it is my opinion that the European Commission should change tack. Fishers should be seen as allies for fish stock management. There are certain past restrictions which are bearing fruit, yes, but we need to ensure that we still have a sector, that it is still attractive to young people, because we're going to be a market which is open to products coming in from outside the EU which have not been produced in line with our standards, which is counterproductive. Consumers want quality and want local produce. In my region, with sardine production, we have academic research. The results of that research have been provided to the Commission. I think it would be appropriate to open up some thinking about this, to have a management procedure which would send out a very clear signal that change is in the air.
Thank you, Mr. Campomenozzi. For 1 minute now, Mr. Juvin. President, ladies and gentlemen, we're all aware our oceans are in a worse state than our land. The oceans are a precious good for humanity, and they can't be subject to plundering. We know that the fishers around the world and far-flung climes don't necessarily have the same rights as our fishers in Brittany to vote there, to fish there. But all fishers need to be brought on board. We need to put an end to industrial models of fishery that are emptying the seas of their fish and reduce the hopes of local fishermen. The question of dolphins being caught off the coast of France is because the dolphins can't feed themselves in the high seas. They have to come closer and closer to the coast to find food. We need to think about revising Law of the Seas and looking at how the income of fishers is made easier and better by using algae, for example. And we need to avoid privatization where big conglomerates are making money hand over fist. Thank you very much, Mr. Juvin. Now for 1 minute, Ms. Carvalho.
President, Commissioner, colleagues, protecting the oceans should be a priority for the EU. But protection means more than banning. The fisheries sector, just like any other, requires environmental protection, yes, but that has to be based on cooperation. That has to involve all stakeholders. I mean business, local communities, those who depend on the resources which we're trying to safeguard. We need sustainable change. We need alternatives on offer rather than just closing doors. We need to invest in people, see businesses and stakeholders as agents of change rather than finger pointing. We need the best available scientific data as the basis rather than ideology or changes of mood with changes of the wind. We need economic sustainability and environmental sustainability going hand in hand. They're not mutually contradictory. In fact, rather, I would say that we can only protect by showing the added value of our actions for not only the planet, but for people's day-to-day lives as well. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Frau Kollegin Carvalho.
Thank you very much, Ms. Carvalho. Ms. Haga.
Dank u, voorzitter. De wereldzeeën worden ernstig bedreigd.
Thank you, Chairman. The oceans of the world are being threatened by climate change and by plastic. We can see that on the coasts on Portugal and Spain, but this is something that happens more and more often. Plastic becomes microplastics, and that ends up in fish, and we end up eating it, so it's a problem for fisheries. So I agree that we have to get rid of plastic pollution. When I talk to fishers, I see that they have a lot of passion for their work, but what they need is tailored legislation, and it's got to be clear. So please come up with a new definition for bottom fisheries, and that way we'd have less influence to the seabed, we'll have less CO2 pollution. Choose for looking after the wonderful resource that is the seas. Thank you very much, Ms. Haga. Ms. Capini, in Catch the Eye.
Domnule președinte.
President, Commissioner, dear colleagues, of course, we should have a common policy, as we have for the industrial policy, the agricultural policy, but I hope it shouldn't be as bad as the agricultural policy, because the ban or protecting the ocean should not lead to a ban on fishing. There are areas where people make their livelihood on fishing, and we as consumers should benefit from the products from the internal market and not to import less control from third countries. So I believe that a common fisheries policy and the future prospects should take into account first and foremost of the protection of fishermen and what they know how to do, and only by dialogue with them to take European measures. Too many times we decide at the EU level without discussing with those who know what needs to be done. Of course, we should reduce pollution with plastics, but this is not related to the fishermen that we need to protect. Thank you.
Frau Kollegin Grappini, es folgt Herr
Thank you, Ms. Grappini. Ms. Callahan.
To ensure that we have sustainable ecosystems for fishers is a critically important aspect of policy. But at the same time, off the west coast of Ireland, as I speak in this chamber, factory trawlers, factory fishing ships are scooping up fish in massive quantities off the west coast of Ireland in Irish waters. And the solution that has been offered to ensure that we have a viable Irish fishing industry is to decommission Irish trawlers. So at the same time, when we're talking about resilient fisheries, we have to ensure that there's fairness in how we allocate the fruits of the sea. And the Irish quota has been drastically reduced. And the idea that we can explain to Irish fishers that it's fair for third countries to send massive trawlers into Irish waters and fish, and we are offering Irish fishermen the only way out, and that is by decommissioning Irish boats. It is shameful, and there must be a full review, Commissioner, of the fisheries policy. Otherwise, we won't have any fishers, not mind sustainable fisheries.
Thank you, Mr. Kelleher. Mr. Mato, 1 minute.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you very much indeed, President. I think the numbers speak for themselves. We have vast swathes of the Mediterranean which are overfished, and we are seeing depopulation on Europe's coasts. This is a problem, but it is not the fault of the people engaged in fisheries. They, however, would look at Parliament and Council, they vote against the ban on use of fossil fuels and against pesticides and on poisonous plastics, whereas the right point the finger elsewhere. And we have the plant in Taranto, the steel plant and coal-fired plants in Brindisi, and all of these are at the cost of small-scale coastal fisheries. And I'm really not exaggerating here. So that is why fishermen feel betrayed. So where are the social buffering measures that we've been calling for decades now?
Thank you, Mr. D'Amato. Ms. Wallace.
Mr. President, the EU already has a comprehensive body of policy and legislation aimed at protecting the marine environment, but these are not being implemented. This was confirmed by the European Court of Auditors in 2020. Ireland, for example, has utterly failed to meet the EU's obligation to achieve good environmental status for biodiversity, commercial fish and shellfish, and seafloor integrity. Only 18% of Ireland's commercially exploited fish populations have achieved good environmental status. The environmental status of 60% of these commercial fish populations is unknown, and the environmental status of 41% of non-commercial fish species is also unknown. If we don't conserve fishing resources and protect our marine ecosystems, there will be no fish to catch, and we do need to work with the stakeholders and have regional solutions.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege Wallace. Zum Abschluss.
Thank you, Mr. Wallace. Ms. Aguilera, to close off down the catch-eye procedure.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. If I look at the EU's action plan, what I heard from you was unfortunate. I'm not saying it's a bad plan, although I don't like all of it, but when you put forward an action plan, this is a political document, which does, however, have major changes in relation to the CFP. So you have to explain these changes well. You need to make it clear to the sector, otherwise it will be difficult for the sector to apply. You need to explain these things well. We really have a bit of a ping-pong. We have a bit of an attack here on trawling. I'm not against trawling, because you can't tar trawling with this, or with all trawling with the same brush. So I find this unfortunate in the action plan, and I don't think it will go anywhere, this action plan, unfortunately. And that's partly due to the way that you've presented it. Thank you very much.
Vielen Dank, Frau Kollegin Aguilera.
Thank you very much, Ms. Aguilera. That's the end of the Catch the Eye. We now have Mr. Sinkevicius from the Commission.
Members of the Parliament, thank you very much for this enriching debate, which has helped us to clarify and share our views regarding the action plan, but also reaffirm once more that we all want to remedy the negative environmental impacts, because the future of our fisheries will depend on our ability to react and adapt. And let me now come to some points that you have raised. First of all, on impact assessment, the action plan is not a legal proposal. In addition, it is based on existing legislation, which impact assessments have been done and they were being adopted. Finally, the design and implementation of the measures is left to member states. So they are best placed to judge what is needed and what the impacts will be, and on that basis ensure a balanced approach. It also has been explained on multiple occasions that action plan not intends to impose any legal measure. The action plans simply calls for a renewed political commitment to make the measures work, involving the Commission, the Parliament, the Council and Member States. It presents the CFP regionalisation process as the right framework for the measures proposed to be implemented. In addition, the technical measures regulation also places the regionalisation in a privileged position. On bottom trawling, again, we had multiple exchanges on that. I've heard it quite a few times today. Dear members of the Parliament, we need a transition to better protection of the seabed, including through the less damaging gears, but also to gears that are less fuel to ensure less fuel consumption. Because when Russia attacked Ukraine, our fishers were left without income. Why? Because of their dependence on fossil fuels. And the fishing techniques that they're using today is unfortunately heavily dependent on fossil fuels. And we cannot keep them in this position where the whole livelihood, the income of their families, would be busted due to events happening in the world. We need to protect them. And this is essential. The last thing on dialogue. You know, I myself, throughout this mandate, have visited all sea basins. I've talked with different communities in different parts of Europe, talked with the fishers from the Mediterranean to Baltic, Bay of Biscay, even a few times. We've been constantly involving fishers in this dialogue. I have accepted them on multiple occasions in Brussels. We had challenging times, starting the mandate with the Brexit issue and going through COVID-19 crisis, and also, as I've said, Russia's war against Ukraine. On all these occasions, I always had the privilege to meet the fishers and answer the questions about their future. And I will do so, same as you members of the Parliament. So, you know, to say that there was a lack of dialogue, it's absolutely not true. We've been always involved, and they were part of the dialogue as regards the action plan. The last thing on the Bay of Biscay, as I see Mr. Bellamy is still in the room, the very important thing to take from the Bay of Biscay, I think we don't need to wait for national courts' decisions to implement EU legislation, because when the national courts' decisions are announced, unfortunately, it's too late. I think we can prevent such things from happening and then ensure the livelihood of the fishers in different sea basins across Europe. Dear colleagues, in conclusion, the principle of regionalisation is the right framework to implement measures proposed in the action plan. So, therefore, it should be fully used to implement necessary measures to protect habitats and species. If we want the EU to continue being a leading actor on global marine conservation, we need to lead the transition to sustainability. So the benefits that ocean provides will be enjoyed also by the future generations, including future fishers. I count on the commitment of this House to work jointly with the Commission in the pursuit of the biodiversity goals, so we can offer our citizens the highest standards of marine conservation and supply of high-quality seafood, while ensuring the livelihoods of European fishing communities also in the future. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kommissar Singewitt.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Finally, let's hear from the rapporteur, Mr. Herbst. 2 minutes. Thank you very much. I'd also like to thank almost all groups who've made it very clear that we're not actually talking about the who or the whether. We really need to focus on how. This shows that when we're talking about fisheries, this Parliament is very unified. What bothered me was the moral arrogance, for example, of Ms. Rose, who's left and said, well, people who disagree are wrong. This moral arrogance is responsible for the fact that fishers tend to vote with the populist parties. I'd like to thank you, Commissioner. You've been subject to a certain amount of criticism, and my report is critical. The first draft was even more critical, but I noted that you had a much more differentiated way of presenting things today, and that we as Parliament will be able to find a solution. It's not just a matter of the objectives of the action plan, but also the implementation. And I think it's good first step, and we'll be able to get somewhere together in the future. I think if we adopted the report in its current form, with the comments of the colleagues, we're in a good position, and we can then go to our officials and say, we're fighting for your cause. There's still a lot of challenges. It's not going to be easy, but we're heading in the right direction. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Herbst. That brings the debate to an end. We now have the report from Mr. Randika on the Common Market Organization in Fisheries and Aquaculture.
Relativ spät dran sind und
we're a little bit behind time. We had 3 almost identical debates and catch the eye with the same speakers, so we're not going to have a catch the eye.
Thank you very much indeed, President and Commissioner. First of all, I should like to thank all of the political groups for cooperating in putting the finishing touches to this piece of work. And clearly, we need to have a set of rules. It's a basic tool to achieving the objectives of the common fisheries policy. And if we can guarantee the supply of diverse aquatic foodstuffs in proper competitive conditions, then we promote transparency and guarantees for the consumers. This is also a basic tool in the fight against illegal, unreported, unregulated fisheries. And the recent overhaul of the CFP was not sufficient to intervene in markets by simply withdrawing or destroying products. We also have to beef up the role of producers' organizations and make sure that it is not the only body which can grant exemptions to standards and to grant access to European funds. Now, one of the first things we have done is to push for better funding for such organizations and also advocate for the inclusion of cofradías as well as prud'hommes de pêche as producers' organizations, because a CMO should facilitate market management and also regulate the function of these bodies as well as recognize the diversity which characterize them, particularly when they actually work. Now, information that we have gathered since 2013 allows us to contemplate further improvements. For example, guaranteeing a standardized application of these standards across all members, because differences sap consumer confidence and also harm free competition in the single market. We also need to approve the digitalization process, which offers a better enforcement of the fisheries control regulation that we have recently adopted, as well as diversifying and also enriching available data on catches traceability, as well as guarantees for consumers without piling on the red tape. These improvements should also include improvement in labeling standards and make sure that we don't see the intrusion of plant-based products on the aquatic foodstuffs market. You can't fish on dry land, and the fisheries sector wants to put a stop to these misleading products which also make misleading claims as to their dietary, organoleptic or sustainability characteristics. These can only be afforded by an aquatic-based diet. So a new food strategy in the EU should make sure there is more clarity when it comes to food labelling and make sure we establish these standards across community legislation. We also have the European Observatory on Aquaculture and Fisheries Products that the Commission runs to analyse the dynamics in the markets and also to support the decisions and policies in the sector. And if we dig a bit deeper into those data on volumes, values and prices throughout the chain, then we can respond quickly when there are drastic changes as a result of unforeseeable factors such as the COVID crisis. Now, I would like to end by thanking my team and all those who've been involved in negotiations. Thank them for their positive and constructive approach. Thank you very much.
Vielen Dank, Frau Kollegin Bilbao-Barandica.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bilbao-Barandica. We now hear from Mr. Sinkevicius on behalf of the Commission.
He's always completely surprised when he gets it wrong. Yeah.
Thank you very much, President. Honourable members, let me start by thanking Ms. Bilbao, the shadow rapporteurs and the entire PESH committee for the work done on this own initiative report, which the Commission welcomes. And I'm happy to see that most of your finding concurs with the Commission's own report that we adopted in February 2023. And in particular, we both conclude that the Common Market Organisation regulation generally remains fit for purpose. Allow me to share Commission's views. I also agree that the producer organisations play a key role and that more efforts are necessary to support the implementation and financing of their production and marketing plans. And this remains, of course, a responsibility of the Member States. Nevertheless, the Commission works closely with concerned parties to facilitate the implementation of the plans and provide guidance. I know how important the recognition of producer organisations such as Cofradías and Prudomi is for you. Cofradia and Prudomi are welcome to adapt their structures in line with the rules. And in all my meetings with fishing communities where this issue was raised, I have always reiterated the Commission readiness to assess in that process. Regarding the difficulties for small-scale producers to set up producers' organisations, I can reassure you that the national programmes under the MFAF address these challenges and the Commission continues to provide guidance here. On your call to improve marketing standards and consumer information, I fully agree that proper labelling is essential for the trust of consumers. A better consumer information relies on three elements. First of all, full traceability. Here, the timely implementation of the new fisheries control regulation is crucial. Secondly, compliance. Compliance by Member States with the regulation on the Common Market Organisation. And this is an area which we will prioritise in 2024. And third, consumer rights to an informed choice. And here we will work in 2024 towards a methodology to score some sustainability aspects for fishery and aquaculture products. The report also mentions the need to include marketing standards in measures adopted in regional fisheries management organisations. Unfortunately, marketing standards are not covered by these organisations, but conservation and other control measures are in place to ensure sustainable fisheries. The report highlights the need to increase the use of quality schemes and to have a greater variety of quality schemes. The Commission, however, thinks that there is no need for more quality schemes, as the existing types seem to be wide enough to promote the specificities of European fishery and aquaculture products. And the best example is in the context of the quality scheme of the geographical indication, which increased by 240% over the last decade in the EU. However, I can agree with you that the producer to obtain a quality scheme needs to be improved. So therefore, the Commission adopted a proposal in March 2022 to revise the geographical indications regulations. The report also includes a call to forbid the use of the word fish or the name of fish species for plant-based products. The current EU rules already provide a solid framework to ensure that consumers are not misled. Regarding the mechanism to trigger financial aid under the regulation on the common market organisations in the event of a crisis, let me recall that crisis support already exists under the MFAF. The Commission closely monitors market development and the conditions to trigger it. So thank you for your attention and thank you for this excellent report.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kommissar Sinkevicius. Es spricht nun.
Thank you very much. Now for 2 minutes, Ms. Montero de Aguiar.
Muito obrigada, Sr.
Thank you, President. First of all, I'm grateful for all the work that's been done on this file. Thank you to Izaskun for the improvements she's made. This regulation is one of the pillars of the CFP. This regulation is an excellent opportunity for Europe, in particular for Portugal, when it comes to strengthening the fishing sector and the aquaculture sector. So it will lead to greater sustainability and justice. It will provide greater support and will ensure that the outermost regions are taken into account, as well as their particularities. We in Portugal produce some of the biggest fish captures in Europe. We have one of the biggest exclusive economic zones. Our fishermen and women and the whole industry, the whole value chain, needs to enjoy good conditions where they can provide good products to the consumer, and there should be clear information provided to the consumer. Now, there's a major change brought about by the CMO, and that is that POs are strengthened. These producer organizations play a key role when it comes to managing the market, including marketing management plans. Now, progress has been made with this regulation, but there are challenges. We need to ensure that there is clear enforcement in the member states, and we need to have harmonization of practices so that consumers have greater trust in fisheries products, and we need to ensure better conditions for all in the sector. We need to ensure traceability and transparency throughout all value chains. That will help us to protect margins and to ensure that consumers have more trust in products. To conclude, it is our responsibility to continue to work on this regulation, to improve it, so that in the future our fisheries sector and our aquaculture sector are more sustainable. And of course, we have to protect our marine resources hand in hand with our communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Montero de Aguilar. 1 minute for Ms. Aguilera.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much indeed, President. Well, this market organisation regulation brings in a few changes building on those of 2013. And I would like to congratulate Ms. Bilbao for all the work that we have been able to do together. And I think that the results are there for all to see. Now, the report tries to improve some of the aspects of the 2013 regulation, particularly, for example, greater efforts to ensure standardization and consumer confidence. I mean, that's what the Commissioner was just saying. We also have to improve traceability as well. And we very much hope that the new fisheries control regulation will help in that regard. And also, we need to roll out promotion campaigns, but we also need to look at the effect of the crisis on the sector. So not only observe it, but use the tools which are contained in the regulation and ensure that they are triggered at a time of crisis. And so we will look closely at the future of this reform. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Frau Kollegin Aguilera.
Thank you, Ms. Aguilera. 1 minute, Ms. Rose. Thank you, President. Mr. Herbst, I did not leave the debate earlier. As to this report, it makes an interesting proposals to improve information for consumers for seafood. It's important for consumers to have access to detailed information about the origins of species, date and place of catch, or the fishing gears used, whether we're talking about fresh, tinned, frozen, or processed products. However, we feel it's taking a wrong turning when you talk about vegan alternatives to seafood. The European Union imports 70% of the seafood that it consumes. If we want to fight overfishing throughout the world, we need to reduce our consumption of fish. Vegan alternatives to seafood are an important way forward to reduce this consumption while at the same time ensuring a sufficient intake of protein. When you look to ban these vegan alternatives and say that they cannot say anything about the sea, you're actually going down the wrong road. The consumers need to be well informed, yes, but to oppose these vegan alternatives, like some have opposed vegetarian burgers, is completely out of step with what citizens want, what we need for the planet. Thank you very much, Ms. Rose. Now, Mr. Pinta Lopez.
President, there have been various reforms of the CMO. The last one, in particular, has not helped to improve the livelihood of the sector or to make the markets more sustainable or to make it easier to market. We've had this new reform. It's tinkered around the edges, but it will really affect the small-scale fisheries sector. We need a deep CMO reform, where there is public intervention into the markets, where there can be good yields for the sector, and where the sector can sell the products and gain added value. The member states should be able to intervene in the market by establishing maximum margins for each link of the chain, and there should also be minimum compensation so that it is possible to land all catch, including undesired catch. So it should therefore be possible to cover all those costs at all times. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege.
Thank you, Mr. Pimenta Lopez. Now, for the Commission, Commissioner Sinkevičius. I would be grateful if at least the heads of the groups would show that we're still in the middle of a debate and would not have discussions in the chamber. Mr. Osmani.
Possibly you sit down or leave the room until the vote started. Herr Kollege, Herr Kommissar.
Commissioner, please.
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, I'll be very brief. First of all, let me thank Ms. Bilbao and the PESH committee for an excellent report where we, I think, fundamentally agree on the things that needs to be done and needs to be improved. So we commit ourselves to further work with all stakeholders along the supply chains to ensure that the things are swiftly improved. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kommissar Sinkevičius. Zum Abschluss der Aussprache.
Thank you very much. Finally, let's once again hear from the rapporteur, Ms. Bilbao Barandica.
Gracias, comisario, por su...
Commissioner, thank you for your answer and your position. There is one thing we disagree on. We need to re-establish storage aid so that we can deal with future crises. Now, Ms. Roos, let me say something to you. This report, this committee, this Parliament is not against plant-based products. What we're against, what we're decrying, is plant-based products having a misleading label. But we do see that. We have seen that throughout the European market. We need transparency and traceability to ensure that fishermen and fisherwomen's rights are upheld. Same needs to hold true for consumers. Now let me say something else. There's been a lot of attacks on the fisheries sector. That hasn't taken into account the fact that there have been changes to the size of the fleet and that it has become more technologically forward-looking. Thanks to agreements with third countries, we are also spreading our values throughout the seas of the world. With this CMO regulation, we have a further tool, an excellent tool, to ensure greater transparency. And that will help to fight back against the criticisms levelled against this professional sector, which is providing high-quality, wholesome food to the European diet. We're now going to have more data, more information, more certification, greater contracting. That means that the professionals in this sector will enjoy a better relationship with consumers. Now, one final thing. We are producing truly sustainable foodstuffs. And this is a sector which for many years has been dealing with the triple sustainability issue, environmental, economic and social. So there cannot be any campaigns which ignore the greater sustainability of the sector. And that would simply be populist to ignore that. This CMO, the CFP and the new control regulation are facts. They should clear up any doubts about the sector, about how, when and who is involved in the sector and who our fishermen and women are and who the industry is.
Vielen Dank, Frau Kollegin Bilbao Barandica.
Thanks, Ms. Bilbao Barandica. That brings the debate to a close and the vote will take place today. We'll have a brief break.
Bene, cari colleghi, la seduta è...
Colleagues, we resume the sitting, so I'd invite you all to take your seats as quickly as possible. We've got a particularly long voting session today. And let's start with a motion for a resolution, 5 groups, on the ongoing persecution of Falun Gong in China, notably the case of Mr. Ding Yuande. Let's start with Amendment 1. Show of hands in favour. Against? Abstentions? That is carried. So please make sure that you do raise your hands so that we can see. OK, let's do a check. People are still coming into the chamber. So yes, I think it would be a good idea to have a check on Amendment 1. The vote is open. This is Amendment 1. The vote is open. The vote is closed. It is rejected. So, vote as a whole, show of hands. Please make sure you raise your hands. Against? Abstentions? That is carried. We now move on to a joint motion for a resolution. 6 political groups on the threat of famine following the spread of conflict in Sudan. 5 original text, 2 parts, by show of hands. First part in favour. Against? Abstentions? That is carried. Second part in favour. Against? Abstentions? Carried. Resolution as a whole. Show of hands in favour. Against? Abstentions? That is carried. We now move on to a joint motion for a resolution. 6 groups on Tajikistan state repression of the independent media. 5 original text. Split vote, 2 parts. First in favour. Against? Abstentions? That is carried. Second part. Roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. That is carried. We now move on to the resolution as a whole. Roll call open. Closed. Carried. We now move on to the MEPs report on nutrition and health claims made on foods. I shall give the floor to the rapporteur. Ms. Metz, for 2 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Mille. I will be very short, don't worry. So, dear colleagues, the claims regulation applies to voluntary nutritional and health claims on food products and food supplements in all commercial communication. The objective of the regulation is a high level of consumer protection and smooth functioning of the internal market. We want to protect European consumers, their safety, their health, but let's be honest, also their wallet. The regulation has been in force for more than 15 years, and I think we can agree that it has significantly contributed to protecting consumers from false and misleading health and nutrition claims on food. But still today, consumers continue to be exposed to unauthorised and misleading claims. The report we vote today addresses key challenges in the implementation and suggests the regulation might need to be updated. So we have 3 issues, very shortly. Consumers continue to be exposed to very unhealthy foods with authorised claims because 15 years after the regulation came into force, the foreseen nutrition thresholds for such claims have still not been established. Secondly, there is an on-hold list with over 2,000 claims on botanicals. Due to a lack of data, EFSA stopped evaluating these claims and the Commission put the claims on hold over a decade ago. This anomaly needs to be addressed. And thirdly and lastly, online sales of food and supplements with unauthorised claims are booming. More cooperation and guidance are needed for successful implementation of this regulation in the online environment. I would like also to use this opportunity to thank the different stakeholders which provided us with input, and as well to all my colleagues from other groups for constructive collaboration. Thank you.
Allora passiamo alla votazione, paragrafo 4.
On to the vote. 4 original text in favour. Against. Carried. Amendment 1, roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. That is rejected. We move on to paragraph 8, original text in 2 parts. First part, in favour. Please put up your hands if you're in favour. Against? Abstentions? Well, I think that it was carried. Make sure that you give us a proper show of hands, otherwise we'll have to check. Let's do a check. So the vote is open. The vote is closed. That is carried. Second part, roll call vote. Vote is open. The vote is closed. That is carried. Amendment 2, roll call vote. Vote is open. Vote is closed. That is rejected. Recital M, 2 parts. First part, in favour. Against. Abstentions carried. Second part, roll call vote. Vote is open. The vote is closed. And that is carried. Resolution as a whole, roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. And it is carried. We move on to the Grappini report on the protection of the European Union's financial interests combating fraud, annual report 2022, Amendment 4. Show of hands. No, I do apologise. Ms. Grappini wishes to speak. She has 2 minutes. Please go ahead, madam.
So sorry. Okay, stimați colegi.
Dear colleagues, this report regarding the protection of the financial interests of the EU, as you know, is voted every year. I would like to thank from the very beginning to the CONT committee that in a large majority voted for our position. I would also like to thank shadow rapporteurs for their cooperation. That doesn't mean that we haven't had stuff to talk about in this report. In the revenues and expenses report, we find that fraudulent practices have been detected, and however, transnational fraud with VAT should have been reduced, and it wasn't. This means that we need to see changes in the following period. I would also like to thank the Court of Auditors, Olaf, Eurojust and Europol for their cooperation in identifying and preventing fraud risks. I would also like to underline in this report, and I did as rapporteur, that we need to supervise the spending of European funds, because this is taxpayers' money, and we need to keep an eye on these funds, not only in member states but also in European institutions. When it comes to anti-fraud architecture, I recommend in this report that there is good cooperation and coordination within the relevant departments. We need to coordinate and to focus on combating fraud. We need more efficiency and more transparency, because we have seen a lot of lack of transparency from all the institutions. Thank you, and please vote as the CONT committee voted for the report, which is very important to protect our financial interests in the EU. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Amendment 4, show of hands in favour, against, abstentions. It is reject. Amendment 1, show of hands in favour, against, abstentions. Let's do a check. This is Amendment 1. Vote is open, of course, and the vote is now closed. And it is carried. Amendment 5, show of hands in favour, against, abstentions, reject. Amendment 6, roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. Rejected. Amendment 8, this is split vote. First part, roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. Carried. Second part, roll call vote. Vote is open. The vote is closed. And is rejected. Amendment 7, roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. And it is rejected. Paragraph 94, original text in 2 parts. Roll, raise hands against, abstentions, carried. Second part, in favour, against, abstentions. Let's do a check. The vote is open. The vote is closed. And it is carried. Amendment 2, show of hands in favour. Against? Abstentions? Rejected. Amendment 3, show of hands in favour. Against? Abstentions? Rejected. Resolution as a whole. Roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. And it is carried. We now move on to the Hautala report, access to remedy and the human rights. I give the floor to the rapporteur for 2 minutes.
Yes. So 45 seconds from my side. The United Nations negotiations on the legally binding treaty on business and human rights were commenced already in 2014. Some EU member states have taken part, but unfortunately the EU as a bloc has been absent. Now we have a momentum. The long-awaited EU Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive is nearly finalised, and this is the momentum for the EU's participation in this critically important UN process. Our goal must be to ensure a level playing field for companies through global standards. So this report aims to invite the Commission and External Action Service to shape and adopt an EU negotiation mandate, and we want to provide some elements for an ambitious mandate. Thank you.
Grazie. Allora votiamo.
Thank you very much. So resolution as a whole. Roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. And it is carried. Now to the Melo report on the impact of illegal fishing on food security. Single vote, roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. And it is carried. Now we move on to the Pagatsautuntua report on extending the list of EU crimes to hate speech and hate crime. Amendment 4, roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. Rejected. So Amendment 7 then, roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. And it is rejected. Amendment 8, roll call vote. Vote is open. The vote is closed. And it is rejected. Amendment 10, roll call vote. Vote is open. The vote is closed. It is rejected. We move on to paragraph 7, original text in 2 parts. First part, show of hands in favour. Against. Abstentions carried. Second part, show of hands in favour. Against. Abstentions carried. Amendment 9, roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. And it is rejected. Amendment 11, roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. Rejected. Amendment 2, show of hands in favour. Against. Abstentions. Rejected. Amendment 3, show of hands in favour. Against. Abstentions. Rejected. Amendment 5, show of hands in favour. Against. Abstentions. Rejected. Amendment 1, show of hands in favour. Against. Abstentions. Reject. Amendment 6, roll call vote. Vote is open. The vote is closed. And it is rejected. Vote on the resolution as a whole. Roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. And it is carried. We now move on to the Mato report on the implementation of the Common Fisheries Policy and future perspectives. Paragraph 6, original text in 2 parts. Show of hands. First part in favour. Against. Abstentions carried. Second part, show of hands in favour. Against. Let's do a check. We'll do a check. I couldn't really see. Make sure you've got your hands up properly. But the vote is now open. Vote is closed. And it is carried. So paragraph 15, original text, roll call vote. The vote is open. Vote is closed. And it is carried. Amendment 3, show of hands in favour. Against. abstentions rejected. Amendment 4, show of hands in favour. Against, abstentions rejected. Paragraph 26, indent 4, original text, show of hands in favour. Against, abstentions, and that is carried. Amendment 5, roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed and is rejected. Amendment 6, a show of hands in favour. Against, abstentions rejected. Paragraph 41, original text in two parts, show of hands in first part in favour. Against, abstentions. Nobody put their hands up. It's a bit difficult. Then we're going to do a check. Okay, the vote is open. The vote is closed. And it is carried. So please make sure you put your hands up properly. The second part in favour. Against, abstentions carried. Amendment 7, show of hands in favour. Against, abstentions rejected. Paragraph 53, original text, roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. And it is carried. Paragraph 63, original text, show of hands in favour. Against, abstentions carried. Paragraph 70, original text in two parts, first part in favour. Against, abstentions carried. Second part in favour. Against, abstentions carried. Amendment 2, roll call vote. The vote is open. Vote is closed. And it is carried. Paragraph 83, roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. And it is carried. Paragraph 88, roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. And it is carried. Amendment 1, roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. Carried. Paragraph 91, original text, show of hands. First part in favour. Against, abstentions carried. Second part in favour. Against, abstentions, that is carried. Paragraph 109, original text in two parts. First part, show of hands in favour. Against, abstentions, carried. Second part, roll call vote. Vote is open. The vote is closed and it is carried. So voting on the resolution as a whole, roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed and it is carried. We now move on to the Herbst report on the EU Action Plan, Protecting and Restoring Marine Ecosystems for Sustainable and Resilient Fisheries. Amendment 1, roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed and it is carried. Paragraph 7, original text, roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed and is carried. Amendment 2, roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed and is carried. Amendment 3, roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed and is carried. Amendment 4, roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed and it is carried. Paragraph 13, original text in three parts, show of hands. First part in favour. Against, abstentions carried. Second part, roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed and it is carried. Third part, show of hands in favour. Against, abstentions carried. Amendment 5, roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed and it is carried. Amendment 6, roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed and is rejected. Amendment 7, roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is open. The vote is closed and is rejected. Amendment 8, roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed and it is carried. Amendment 9, roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed and is rejected. Amendment 10, roll call vote. The vote is open. vote is closed. And it is rejected. Paragraph 19, original text in 2 parts. Show of hands. First part in favour. Against. Abstentions carried. Second part. Roll call vote. Vote is open. Vote is closed. And it is carried. Paragraph 23, original text in 2 parts. First part. Show of hands in favour. In favour. Against. Abstentions carried. Second part. Roll call vote. The vote is open. Vote is closed. And it is carried. And now, Amendment 11, roll call vote. The vote is open. Closed. Rejected. 12, roll call vote. Vote is open. Vote is closed. Rejected. 13, roll call vote. Vote open. Closed. Rejected. Now, paragraph 24, original text in 2 parts. First part, show of hands in favour. Against. Abstentions carried. Second part, roll call vote. Open. Closed. And it is carried. Paragraph 25, original text, roll call vote. Vote is open. Closed. Carried. 14, roll call vote. Open. Closed. Carried. Resolution as a whole, roll call vote. Open. Closed. And it is carried. We now move on to the report by Ms. Bilbao Barandica on the implementation of the Common Market Organisation regulation in fisheries and aquaculture. Paragraph 20, original text in 2 parts. First part, show of hands in favour. Against. Abstentions carried. Second part, roll call vote. Vote is open. Closed. Rejected. Paragraph 24, original text, 3 parts. First part, show of hands in favour. Against. Abstentions carried. Second part, in favour. Against. Abstentions carried. Third part, in favour. Against. Abstentions carried. Paragraph 25, original text, roll call vote. Vote is open. Vote is closed. Carried. Paragraph 38, original text in 2 parts. First part, show of hands in favour. Against. Abstentions carried. Second part, roll call vote. Vote is open. Vote is closed. And it is carried. Recital A, original text in 2 parts. First part, show of hands in favour. Against. Abstentions carried. Second part, roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. And it is carried. Now, vote on the resolution as a whole by roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. Carried. We now move on to the Kuhnke report on gender aspects of the rising cost of living and the impact of the energy rates. Original text 3, roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. And is carried. Paragraph 4, 3 parts. First part, show of hands in favour. Against. Abstentions carried. Second part, roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. And it is carried. Third part, roll call vote. The vote is open. Closed. And that it is carried. Paragraph 14, original text, roll call vote. Open. Closed. Carried. Paragraph 16, original text in 3 parts. First part, show of hands in favour. Against. Abstentions carried. Second part, roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. And carried. Third part, roll call vote. Vote is open. Closed. And carried. Paragraph 18, original text in 2 parts. First part, show of hands in favour. Against. Abstentions carried. Second part, roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. And is carried. Paragraph 19, original text, show of hands in favour. Against, abstentions carried. Paragraph 20, original text in two parts. First part, show of hands in favour. Against, abstentions carried. Second part, roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. And it is carried. Paragraph 23, original text in four parts. First part, show of hands in favour. Against, abstentions carried. Second part, roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. And it is carried. Third part, roll call vote. Open. Closed. And it is carried. Fourth part, roll call vote. Open. Closed. And carried. Paragraph 24, original text in two parts. First part, show of hands in favour. Against. Abstentions carried. Second part, roll call vote. The vote is open. Closed. Rejected. Paragraph 35, original text in three parts. First part, show of hands in favour. Against. Abstentions carried. Second part, roll call vote. Vote is open. Vote is closed. And it is carried. Third part, roll call vote open. Closed. Carried. Recital I, original text, roll call vote open. Closed. Carried. Recital AF, original text, roll call vote open. Closed. Carried. Resolution as a whole, roll call vote open. The vote is closed and it is carried. On to the Krasnowiecki report on geothermal energy. Resolution as a whole, roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed and it is carried. Now on to the Barley report on the situation of fundamental rights in the EU in 2022 and 2023. Paragraph 2, original text in two parts. First part, show of hands in favour. Against. Abstentions rejected. Second part, show of hands in favour. Against. Abstentions carried. 22, roll call vote open. Closed. Rejected. 23, show of hands in favour. Against. Abstentions rejected. 16, roll call vote open. Closed. Rejected. So we move on to the original text. Two parts. First part, show of hands in favour. Against. Abstentions carried. Second part, roll call vote. Vote is open. Vote is closed. Carried. Paragraph 22, original text. Show of hands in favour. Against. Abstentions carried. 24. Show of hands in favour. Against. Abstentions rejected. The original text then in two parts. Show of hands in favour. Against. Abstentions carried. Second part in favour. Against. Abstentions carried. Amendment 25. Show of hands in favour. Against. Abstentions rejected. Amendment 26. Roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. And it is rejected. 26, original text in three parts. Show of hands in favour. Against. Abstentions carried. Second part in favour. Against. Abstentions carried. Third part in favour. Against. Abstentions carried. Amendment 27. Roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. And it is rejected. 17. Roll call vote in favour. The vote is closed. Rejected. We move therefore on to original text in two parts. First part, show of hands in favour. Against. Abstentions carried. Second part in favour. Against. Abstentions. It is carried. Amendment 18. Roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. Rejected. Amendment 19. Roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. And it is rejected. Amendment 20. Roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. Rejected. Amendment 28. Show of hands in favour. Against. Abstentions. Rejected. Amendment 21. Roll call vote. Vote is open. Closed. And is rejected. 29. Show of hands in favour. Against. Abstentions. Rejected. Amendment 1. Roll call vote. Vote is open. The vote is closed. Rejected. Amendment 2. Roll call vote. Open. Closed. Rejected. 3. Roll call vote. Open. Closed. Rejected. 4. Roll call vote. Open. Closed. Rejected. 5. Roll call vote. Open. Closed. Rejected. 6. Roll call vote. Open. Vote is closed. Rejected. 7. Roll call vote. Open. Closed. Rejected. 8. Roll call vote. Open. Closed. Rejected. 9. Roll call vote. Open. Closed. Rejected. 10. Open. Closed. Rejected. 11. Open. Closed. Rejected. Recital G. Original text in 2 parts. First part, show of hands in favour. Against. Abstentions. Carried. Second part, roll call vote. Vote is open. Closed. And is carried. Recital M. Original text. Show of hands in favour. Against. Abstentions. Carried. Recital O. Show of hands in favour. Against. Abstentions. Carried. Recital P. 12. Amendment 2. Vote is open. Closed. Rejected. So recital P. Original text in 2 parts. Show of hands in favour. Against. Abstentions. Carried. Second part in favour. Against. Abstentions. Carried. Recital R. Original text. Roll call vote. The vote is open. Vote is closed. Carried. Amendment 13. Roll call vote. Vote is open. Closed. Rejected. 14. Open. Closed. Rejected. 15. Roll call vote. Open. The vote is closed. Rejected. Resolution as a whole. Roll call vote. Open. Vote is closed. And it is carried. We now move on to the motion for resolution. 3 groups on the humanitarian situation in Gaza, the need to reach a ceasefire and the risks of regional escalation. Mr. Baubman, I think, asking for the floor.
Micro. It's a nice start, to start with a boo from you guys. We're talking here about a very big humanitarian catastrophe and a very big conflict. And you all remember, in October, this Parliament stands strong. We made it, we put forward almost with unanimity a strong resolution, in which the Council and the Commission didn't succeed. I negotiated now on Tuesday evening. We negotiated for more than 3 hours on Tuesday. We negotiated yesterday more than 2 hours. And this all morning I tried to convince all parties to arrive again at a strong resolution with unanimity. I don't block anybody, but I want to make a proposal, an oral amendment, which I think that convince the left and the right, and which made a strong statement. Okay,
I'm sorry, you have to read the text.
Now read the amendment. It is about Article 1. It's about the amendment 12. Yeah, but come on, guys. It's about Amendment 12 of ECR, about Amendment 26 of EPP, and about my own amendment. And I want to make one proposal. Listen, and then vote with your heart and look at the text.
Onorevole, deve leggere il testo per cortesia.
You have to read out the text, please, madam.
Ceasefire and to restart efforts towards a political solution. At the same time, colleagues, calls for the immediately and unconditional release of all hostages in a hand-in-hand process. And we demand the dismantling of the terrorist organization Hamas. All is in there, voted, and we have a resolution with a strong majority. Thank you very much.
Bene, grazie. Allora...
Thank you very much indeed. Ms. Votmans then has presented that oral amendment. Anyone opposed to that? Now you have to stand, as you are aware. So if colleagues who are opposed to that oral amendment, and you have to stand. Apparently not.
Allora, naturalmente dobbiamo...
Obviously, we've got to give people time, and we need to count the number of colleagues who are now on their feet.
No. Allora, stanno contando, quindi vi prego...
So we're counting, so please stay standing. Please stay standing so that we can count you.
Avete bisogno, credo, di avere una sospensione.
So I think we're going to need to perhaps suspend the sitting to look at the amendment. You know that this is a practice that we have used on other occasions because we are hearing the amendment now for the first time and the political groups have not had an opportunity to look at it. So we'll give you a couple of minutes. So we'll suspend just for a couple of minutes, just for a few minutes.
Allora, colleghi...
Colleagues.
Sì.
Allora, colleghi, vi prego di prendere posto.
So please take your seats, colleagues. You've had a couple of minutes now to have a look at that oral amendment, so please go back to your seats because we absolutely need to get on with our work.
Allora, colleghi, vi chiedo di prendere posto.
Colleagues, please return to your seats. We must continue with our work. You have had a couple of minutes now. You've had an opportunity to consider the oral amendment, so I think we ought to be in a position to continue. So let me ask you now, if, once again, any colleagues are opposed to that oral amendment that we have just heard from Ms. Vautman. Now, if colleagues are opposed to that oral amendment, then please stand. That way, the Secretariat can tally up the number of colleagues on their feet. So please remain standing. Okay. Now, I am being told that the services have tallied a number of people on their feet, more than 38. Therefore, we will move on to voting. Amendment 12, roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed and rejected. So we move on to Amendment 26, roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed and carried. We move on to Amendment 36, roll call vote. Vote is open. The vote is open and it is rejected. Amendment 35, roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. We are voting on Amendment 35. 35, a roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. So please, do take, remain calm, colleagues. I do apologise. Apparently there's a problem. I hadn't been told. So let me just repeat. We are voting on Amendment 35. The vote is open. So yes, it's working now apparently. That's a good thing. And the vote is closed. And it's rejected. Rejected, which means we vote on Amendment 36. This is a roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. And it is rejected. We vote on Amendment 24. Roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. And it is rejected, which means that we vote on Amendment 38, which is a roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. And it is rejected. Amendment 39, roll call vote. So people are taking their time to vote. It's 39 now. The vote is open. Vote is closed. Rejected. 40, roll call vote. Vote is open. The vote is closed. And it is rejected. Amendment 13, roll call vote. The vote is open. Vote is closed. It is rejected. We vote therefore on the original text in two parts. Show of hands in favour. Against, abstentions, carried. Second part, roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. And it is carried. Amendment 28. Roll call vote. Vote is open. Closed. Slowly, apparently. Okay. It is rejected. Amendment 14. Roll call vote. Vote is open. The vote is closed. And it is carried. So Amendment 32 therefore falls, and we move on to Amendment 41. Roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. And it is rejected. Amendment 42. Show of hands in favour. Against. Abstentions. Rejected. Amendment 43. Roll call vote. Open. Closed. Rejected. Amendment 30, roll call vote. Open. Closed. And is rejected. Amendment 44, roll call vote. Open. Closed. Rejected. 45, open. Closed. Rejected. 46, open. Closed. Rejected. 47, open. Closed. Rejected. 59, open. Closed. Rejected. 48, roll call vote. Open. Closed. Rejected. 49, open. Closed. Rejected. 15, two parts, roll call vote. First part, open. Closed. Carried. Second part, open. Closed. Rejected. Amendment 50, roll call vote. Open. Closed. Rejected. So, we now vote on Amendment 16, roll call vote. Open. Closed. Carried. Amendment 17, roll call vote. Open. Closed. Rejected. 51, therefore, roll call vote. Open. Closed. Rejected. 33, open. Closed. Rejected. 18, open. Closed. Rejected. 52, open. Closed. Rejected. 53, open. Closed. Rejected. So, 23, roll call vote in favour. Open. Closed. Rejected. 29, open. Closed. Rejected. 19, open. Closed. Carried. 20, open. Closed. Rejected. 54, open. Closed. Rejected. 27, open. Closed. Rejected. 55, open. Closed. Rejected. 16, original text. Show of hands in favour. Against. Abstentions carried. Amendment 56, roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. And it is rejected. So we therefore vote on Amendment 21. Show of hands in favour. Against. Abstentions. Rejected. Do you want to check? Yeah? This is 21. Let's do a check. The vote is open. The vote is closed. And it is carried. So then falls original text therefore. Amendment 57, roll call vote. Vote is open. Closed. Rejected. Original text 22 parts. Show of hands in favour. Against. Abstentions carried. Second part in favour. Against. Abstentions carried. Paragraph 21 original text. Show of hands in favour. Against. Abstentions rejected. Amendment. You want to check? Check. 21. Open. Closed. And it is carried. Amendment 22. Open. Closed. Rejected. 58. Open. Closed. Rejected. Amendment 1. Roll call vote. Open. Closed. Carried. 2. Open. Closed. Carried. 34. Show of hands in favour. Against. Abstentions rejected. Recital B. Show of hands in favour. Against. Abstentions carried. Recital C. 2 parts. Show of hands in favour. Against. Abstentions carried. 2. In favour. Against. Abstentions carried. Amendment 3. Roll call vote. Open. Closed. Carried. 4. Open. Closed. Rejected. 5. Open. Closed. Have you all voted? I think you have. Rejected. 6. Open. Closed. I think you've all voted. Carried. 7. Open. Closed. Rejected. 8. Open. Closed. Rejected. 9. Open. Closed. Rejected. 10. Open. Closed. Carried. 11. Open. Closed. Carried. So original text falls. Resolution as a whole. Show of hands in favour. Against. Abstentions. Let's do a check. Let's do a check. Okay, the vote is open. The vote is closed. And it is carried. Now move on to a motion for resolution. Committee on Employment and Social Affairs revision of the mandate of the European Labour Authority. Amendment 1. Roll call vote open. The vote is closed. And it is rejected. 2. Roll call vote open. Closed. Rejected. 3. Open. Closed. Rejected. 4. Roll call vote open. Closed. Rejected. 5. Show of hands in favour. Against. Abstentions. Rejected. Resolution as a whole. Show of hands in favour. Against. Abstentions. It is carried. We now move on to the motion for resolution 5 groups. Situation in Hungary and frozen EU funds. Original text in 2 parts. First part. Show of hands in favour. Against. Abstentions carried. Second part, roll call vote. Vote is open. Closed. And it is carried. Amendment 1, roll call vote open. Closed. Rejected. 2, roll call vote. Vote is open. Closed. Rejected. Paragraph 11, original text, roll call vote open. Closed. And it is carried. So resolution as a whole, roll call vote. The vote is open. It is closed. And it is carried. Thank you very much. So we suspend and come back at 3 o'clock. Question to the Commission. Recent audit on the meat from horses with unreliable arrival, small declaration, unknown drug history entering the EU. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.